The whole ride kicks off when our main character wakes up, only to discover they've been reincarnated into a brand new fantasy world. Sfeel, this brand new land, was packed with jaw-dropping wonders and deadly perils, while the streets throbbed with life and dragons swept across the sky. Magic poured through the world like pure fantasy, molding every dream and every disaster, and bold adventurers launched into quests with raw power and iron courage, hunting the unknown as endless possibilities waited around every corner. The boy suddenly found himself living inside the kind of dream he used to daydream about as a kid, where every corner was packed with wonder, adventure, and non-stop amazement. He grabbed this new beginning like it was his second shot at life, and everything felt magical, brimming with promise. Yet an invisible weight sat in the back of his mind, warning him it wouldn't stay easy, and real life soon slammed that truth into his face. Basic comforts barely existed, people didn't even bathe. Every meal was nothing but tough chunks of meat and bread that crumbled the second you touched it. And the toilets leaned on slimes to swallow the waste. That dream world turned savage in a heartbeat, and the life he landed in stripped away every comfort he used to assume he'd always have. Without electricity, that whole civilization looked like it got ripped straight out of the medieval age. Lying in bed, he suddenly realized his old life had been way too comfortable to forget. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, a perfect world was waiting. Then, suddenly, a flash of light tore across the room, and he threw up his arm to block it. Then he finally looked back, and the door ahead burned with an unreal glow, pulling him toward it like a magnet. Yet every step had him trembling at what might be waiting on the other side. Right then, he couldn't stop asking what this weird phenomenon really meant, because he soon uncovered the bizarre power called Moon Gate dimensional travel. With this power, he could tear through countless worlds, each one packed with miracles and traps of its own. Some were ruled by dinosaurs, others blazed with futuristic empires, and many stretched past anything his mind could picture. And through all those endless chances, his road finally slammed into a place no one had ever seen before. The second he crossed the portal, the whole world snapped into a brand new scene. Instead of some fantasy kingdom, he was dropped into a peaceful countryside village, hemmed in by towering mountains. A familiar sign slammed into place and confirmed what he feared. He was in Japan. His head spun with shock and pure confusion when it hit him. He'd actually landed in the real world. The boy drifted into the quiet village, stunned that more than 10 years had slipped by since he'd last seen a place like this, and wondering if he'd ever get another chance. An old man clocked him instantly, eyes widening at that unfamiliar face, and demanded to know why he was there. Then the boy froze, thrown off guard, and scrambled to find the words to explain himself. Noticing the tremble in his unease, the man gently invited him to lunch. Before long, they were seated side by side, sharing a warm meal and enjoying every simple bite. He suddenly realized it had been ages since he'd last tasted food like that, and even with his weird look, his Japanese came out smooth as ever, leaving everyone around him stunned. He kept asking himself if his own skills were making this whole communication thing feel so effortless. Then, from that moment on, he started pacing between Japan and the other world, living in between both realities like they were his home. He finally clocked the real rule of his power. Only he could squeeze through the Moon Gate alive, nobody else. But anything physical could slip between worlds with zero trouble. With that discovery in hand, the path to massive profit suddenly lit up in their minds. Even though life in Esfield was anything but comfortable, he refused to give up. He started hunting for ways to cash in on his power, dreaming that one day he could even afford a real bath. He stared at the brutal gap between the two worlds. One gold bar in Japan could snatch a mansion, but in Esfield it was barely enough for a month of wages. Meanwhile, in Esfield, cakes and spices were so scarce they practically cost the same as a whole house, so the shock finally hit him. He cooked up a ruthless plan: sell Japanese goods in the other world, and watch a fortune stack up. In the village, people kept coming back to thank him for every little help, but he just waved it off with humble silence. Surrounded by the elders, his kindness was the rock everyone leaned on. While he wrestled with what to do with his earnings, one idea hit hard. He decided to start by stocking up on snacks. He couldn't spill the real reason he wanted to sell them in the other world, but he didn't hesitate. He kicked off his plan with steady, unshakable determination, and the whole thing started to move. Alan swaggered up to Albert, a merchant, and unveiled some seriously strange goods. So weird that Albert blinked in shock, stared them down, and demanded to know where they came from, because there was no way anyone else would have had items this unique. When they asked if he'd ever appeal to nobles, Alan smirked and teased the idea. like the options were about to explode. Even though Albert admitted he didn't have direct ties, he was sure the nobles would go wild for these rare treasures, making them incredibly easy to sell. Albert admitted selling to nobles wasn't totally off the table, but it was a gamble, and the risks hit hard. Merchants played by silent rules, and breaking them was a one-way ticket to unwanted eyes on you, especially among nobles, where sweets weren't just candy, they were pure status, and sometimes even a bargaining chip for diplomacy. That's why nobles didn't trust just anyone. They leaned on trusted merchants for those delicate exchanges. Reluctantly, Albert finally admitted the hard truth. His shop was just too small to handle trade at that level. Albert admitted that, as a humble merchant, he couldn't go toe-to-toe with the ones who sold straight to the nobles. Then Alan looked like he was about to jump ship, and just as fast he pivoted the conversation, showing off other goodies beyond the sweets, and basically just wanted Albert's take as a merchant. Then boom, a familiar woman showed up, beaming as she greeted Alan and Albert, shocked to see them side by side after all this time. At the marketplace, Alan and Albert suddenly bumped into a woman who recognized them. Then she spotted Alan gripping a brightly wrapped foreign snack and demanded to know where he got it. Curious, she couldn't help wondering if Alan had started moonlighting as a merchant too. Alan admitted he wasn't official yet, but you could tell he was itching to get into the trade. As they kept talking, she pushed for everyone else to take a bite of that weird treat. Then Albert's face burned, because the moment Alan stepped closer, it felt like he was crossing into rival territory. The moment those foreign snacks hit the table, the women snatched them up fast and lit up the instant they tasted them. Thrilled, they grabbed copies fast and promised to tell everyone else. Then Alan finally got the push and support he'd been needing. Albert muttered under his breath, cursing the chaos he'd invited just by selling them out in the open. By the end, Alan just stood there, staring at the empty box in shock. Those snacks had vanished completely. When the snacks finally vanished, Alan beamed and bragged about how it all worked, then tipped his hat to the village mothers who made it happen, laughing that if it had been chocolate, the profits would have blown the roof off. He grabbed the leftover chocolate, offered it like a heartfelt thank you, shoved it into Albert's hands, and then bolted out. As Albert watched him disappear, he couldn't stop wondering, did Alan really have that natural gift for business? Sinking into a steamy hot spring, he let the heat wash over him and savor every second. He finally realized just how long it had been since anything felt this good. Yet back in Japan, cold reality crushed him hard without a family register. He couldn't rent a place, land a stable job, or even wriggle free from his money problems. Even so, he stared forward and felt steel-clad resolve bloom in his chest. Because no matter how brutal life got, he refused to stop believing that a brighter future was still waiting for him. After his first wild attempts, he finally proved it. Japan's goods could actually hit big in this other world. But he also knew one thing for sure. Selling plain sweets wouldn't turn him into a millionaire overnight. But the real boss fight was next, figuring out what to trade and how to survive the maze of rules, while merchants closed in and left everything hanging in the air. He admitted he still had a lot to figure out before he could move forward. After that relaxing bath, he swung into a lively tavern and treated himself to a refreshing drink. Savoring that rich alcohol from another world, he let the luxury of the moment sink in, almost perfect, as he enjoyed it in quiet bliss. Right then, the cheerful chatter vanished, like someone yanked the plug, and the whole room froze in silence as the door swung open, the echo blasting through the air and snapping every single head toward the surprise arrival. The tavern's silence shattered under the stomp of a terrifying figure. Whispers rippled across the room as she emerged, the Black Princess. Nobody in this tiny town expected her, and as Alan watched, memories came back. She was a transferee from another world too, just like him, and she was Japanese. In this crazy world, everyone's got a one-of-a-kind origin and crazy skills, kind of like him. They died and got reborn, starting a brand new life. But the memories from their past life came along for the ride. Life, then bam, others got yanked away, ripped from a different world with zero warning. Even in this tiny town, there were always a few weirdos with backstories that didn't make sense. People who got reincarnated or transferred in, and somehow woke up with powers way past the usual level, turning them into adventurers or full-on magic scholars. Among them loomed the Black Princess. People stared in awe, but nobody forgot how terrifying she could be. She leads the Dawn Moon Brigade, a squad of badass all-female adventurers, and everyone knows their legends. Because she's the one who shredded monsters that should have destroyed anyone else, with skill that's impossible to deny. So when people finally get to see her up close, her bold, unforgettable presence hits like a thunderclap, and it sticks. Alan watched the whole scene like a hawk, clocking how the Black Princess practically commanded respect and trust from every noble and merchant in sight. Yet even with that pull, something in her presence still made his skin crawl, so he didn't stick around. Right after he settled his tab, he hurried out of the tavern, way sooner than he ever did. He shot him a quick, confident grin, then waved it off like, "I've got business to handle," and slipped away. As he browsed a buzzing store in Japan, eyes scanning every corner for his next obsession, Alan struck up a chat with Keita, grilling him about what manga everyone's buzzing over. Then he asked straight up if that title was really popular. Keita lit him in, saying it was one of the top series and even ran weekly in Champ, and Alan nodded, admitting he wasn't up to speed on the newest hits. Their chat took a sharp turn when Keita spotted a women's fashion magazine sitting there, and Alan nodded like, "Yep, that's right," admitting he was doing that little favor for a friend. After wrapping up his purchase, Alan headed for the door, masking the truth that nobody had ever asked him for those items. Clutching the books to his chest, he thought about the Black Princess, and realized it was way too risky to approach her head-on in that moment. Unlike him, she'd been dropped into this world with no warning, and with his field offering almost no distractions, he could only pray his hunch about how useful those books were was right. Even with the cost crushing down on him, he threw his faith into the plan anyway, locked in and ready to make it succeed. Alan stared at a restaurant with its doors slammed shut, and a sign warning it was reserved for the day. He'd heard the ones he spotted were in there, but with the curtains yanked shut, he couldn't get a single proof. Anxiety gnawed at him as he weighed every move, because blow this chance, and who knows when the next one would show up. But dragging it out would only make things worse, and Alan just kept standing outside that shut store. A razor-sharp voice snapped his name, cutting through the noise like a blade. One of the Black Princess's companions stepped up and confronted him, blasting out, "Why are you just standing there?" And he froze for a second before snapping back into control. Alan told her he'd arrived with a message he had to hand straight to the Black Princess herself, and the moment those words hit, her interest snapped into high gear, begging to know what he was really up to. Alan thrust the package into her hands, swearing it was free, then added that if the Black Princess didn't want it, she could toss it aside. Right before the guard could even react, he bolted off with shocking speed, and she just stood there, totally stunned by how fast he vanished. Later, she marched into the building with the package, saying some strange man had shoved it into her hands and ordered her to deliver it straight to the captain. One of the Black Princess's companions tore the package apart, inspecting it with ruthless care. They made sure it wasn't dangerous, checked it for poison and any nasty magic, and once it passed, they agreed it was safe to hand over. Dragged right before the captain herself, the crew explained the box was meant for her, just for her, and they even said she could toss it aside if she didn't want it, and once she gave the nod, the Black Princess took a breath and went for the lid. He couldn't stop wondering what was inside, and when the package finally popped open, the mystery turned out to be books. The companions couldn't believe it. What rare thing could possibly be important to their captain? The second the Black Princess locked eyes on them, everything in her snapped. Emotion surged so hard she froze dead in place, leaving everyone around her wide-eyed and desperate to understand what just hit her that deep. Clutching the book like it might vanish, the Black Princess's calm shattered as raw emotion surged up, too powerful to hold back. She snapped at her companion, voice sharp with urgency, who brought the package. The look on her face said everything. Those contents mattered more than anything, and she was desperate to find out who sent them. Chaos exploded as soldiers thundered through the night streets, ripping after a young woman, and yelling that she was the divine child. Panic blazing in her chest, she sprinted like her life depended on it, questions swarming her mind. Where was she and why were they chasing her? She had no answers, just one goal, keep running and find a way out. Moments before, she was just waiting at school to get picked up. Then the entire world lurched and warped out of nowhere. She got dropped into a brand new world, stumbled, and right away danger came for her. Her fear kept climbing as the situation turned deadly. She was sure this was the end for her right there. As the end closed in, sorrow crashed over her. Her thoughts spiraled straight to her father, and regret burned hot in her heart. The girl blinked awake, staring at a room she didn't recognize, while a warm couple hovered nearby, finally breathing out in relief when she opened her eyes. They told her they were innkeepers, and how they found her crumpled at the base of a cliff. She was still rattled and disoriented, but their calm, caring concern wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time she finally felt safe, for now. Realizing she tumbled off the cliff, the girl caught her breath and thanked the couple like her life depended on it. They brushed off their own importance, but then dropped a strange truth. Her survival wasn't luck, it was proof she was a divine child. Still confused, she leaned in and listened as they swore a divine child was a God-sent messenger, someone who would tumble in from another world, and her dark hair, they said, was the unmistakable sign that fate had chosen her. The couple spilled that divine children were rumored to get special powers, but it was obvious she had no clue what they were talking about. Overwhelmed and shaking, she confessed it all hit her way too fast, and she had zero clue what was going on. They soothed her and told her to rest for now, pushing all the questions to later. She thanked them softly, grateful but still rattled. After she finally recovered, she hugged the kind couple who'd sheltered her and then set off alone, no looking back. With one goal in her sights, to claw her way back to her original world, she kicked off her journey. Whispers about the divine child spread like wildfire, pulling people right to her side. And with their backing, she finally didn't have to walk that road alone. Soon, the Dawn Moon Brigade's name lit up across the whole land. With her loyal crew all around her, she suddenly realized how lucky she was to have found people who trusted her completely and followed her without a second thought. Deep in her heart, she kept one burning wish alive, that one day she'd finally spill the whole truth to them. For now, she kept charging ahead, driven by her secret and the ties that had grown into something unbreakable. Alan burst into the bar, and the moment he stepped inside, they greeted him like they'd been waiting. Then the Black Princess flashed the letter and confirmed he was right on track. Once they got the go-ahead, guards locked the room down and drinks hit the table. Now the whole vibe was finally private. They just stood there, staring each other down, and the air itself felt heavy, like this meeting was about to change everything. Inside the bar, Alan and the Black Princess sat across from each other, trading careful words like every sentence could explode. So Alan leaned in and insisted, "Relax. This is just a chat between fellow citizens." Curious, he blurted out whether she was Japanese. She nodded and told him her whole situation, and then Alan dropped the bombshell. He was a reincarnated person. He pumped out his name as Alan, broke, unemployed, and just 20. And she answered, "Sioji Shizuku," 18 years old, like it clicked something in the air when they realized they both came from the same place. Alan leaned in and asked for her real name. She answered without hesitation, "Shinjo Masato," and then dropped the truth that she'd once been just a normal person until she died at 25. She blurted out a quick apology for oversharing, and Alan immediately waved it off, telling her he genuinely didn't mind at all. He pointed out right then that when he said Sioji, she didn't bat an eye, and that threw him for a loop, making him wonder if she was from a totally different time than the other transfers he'd met. But she looked just as shocked that he didn't recognize her name, like she'd once been a well-known figure before. Alan mused that time had moved on, but it barely felt that way. Because the world he lived in still looked like Japan in the Showa era, and he even admitted it had been 20 years since he died. That shock hit Shizuku like a jolt. She blurted out, "Can I go back to Japan?" Her hope surged, but Alan wasted no time cutting in with the truth. It was impossible for her to return. With no one left alive but him able to slip between worlds, she swallowed the crushing truth with a heavy, shaking look. Alan swallowed his pride and apologized for dangling such false hope in front of her. Alan spotted her empty glass and, like it was no big deal, offered to pour her something to drink, while she stalled, pointing out that the owner wasn't there. Alan dug through everything and yanked out a bottle like it was treasure, flashing a cheerful grin as he said, "Try this one." He flashed total confidence like a brilliant idea just hit him, and she accepted the drink, then took a careful, cautious sip. That tea tasted nothing like anything she'd ever brewed at home. It hit with a wild flavor, a stronger aroma, and a whole new kind of sensation. Even though it felt unfamiliar at first, she couldn't help loving it. She took in that strange, one-of-a-kind flavor and held onto the sweet little satisfaction it gave her. He blinked and realized he'd totally blanked on her real age. He'd mistaken her mature vibe for someone way older, even though she was still just a high school student. She cracked open the truth, cheeks burning from the vulnerability, and he slipped in reassurance so effortlessly it felt like a warm blanket. Deep in her heart, she still craved a road back to Japan. But the tiny bond they had forged was bringing her peace and real happiness. And when memories of Soba came flooding back, it reminded him of the tears he cried the first time he tasted it after reincarnation. He said it like he knew she'd get it, and when she agreed to be his sponsor, she made one condition. He'd prep everything she asked for, so he nodded and accepted without hesitation. Even those reminders hit hard. No family register, no steady income, so life got messy fast. Still, she decided to send a letter, then steered the talk straight to his skills. She leaned in and asked if he could handle paperwork, but it was obvious she had a bigger plan for him. The next morning, the captain snapped everyone together and rallied her crew. Alan shows up as the newest member, slides right into their group, and she backs him with her word, vouching that he's trustworthy. A bunch of them went pale when they finally clocked him, the same weird guy they'd run into the day before. So Alan, feeling the tension snap in the air, tried to wave them over to say hello, even though the whole place felt ice-cold and suffocating. The group started worrying the moment Alan showed up, saying, "He's a guy. Are we really okay with this?" Still, the captain didn't budge. She nailed him with a supplies managing job because he could read and calculate, and she handed Anna the mission of training him. Alan's loud outburst screamed pure disbelief, because he had just been handed responsibility he never saw coming. Alan sat there, thinking about how brutal it was to earn the captain's trust, and honestly, he never once thought he'd end up joining the brigade for real. Others couldn't stop staring at how wildly energized the captain felt around him, like they'd never seen that side of him before. But the thought of some random man joining the Dawn Moon Brigade, that was pure chaos, so rare it felt almost impossible. Alan snatched the catalog and instantly felt the weight of the workload crushing down on him. He asked if it had all been handled by one person up to now, and Aina nodded, confirming it was all on her. She told him that besides the captain, she was the only one who could do the calculations. So if she didn't handle it, nobody else could, and she had to carry the whole load herself. Aina decided to track the stock herself, then told Alan to take over the supply run, calming him with a promise that if he dropped the brigade's name, merchants would treat him fairly. Alan nodded and agreed. Before he even stepped out, he stopped and worriedly told her, "Don't you push yourself too hard. Take it easy, okay?" Ine flashed him a quick little wave as he headed off. Alan marched through the roaring streets, completely swallowed by his own thoughts. He never thought he'd end up in the Dawn Moon Brigade. But now he's in it, and the idea of becoming their merchant won't leave his mind, because the chances it could open up feel huge, even the thought of trading with nobles. Even with doubts clawing at him, he knew he had to prove himself, deliver results, earn his place, and become a real member of the group. The moment that thought snapped into focus, someone suddenly shouted his name. The rumor of Alan's tie to the Dawn Moon Brigade sprinted through town, and even the local housewives couldn't stop talking about it. He couldn't help but eagerly grill him about how his spot was tied to rumors about a romance with the Black Princess, though he tried to play it cool and still came out flustered. Alan waved it off, swearing he was just a spare, nothing more than a guy whose work caught her eye, yet those rumors still hung in the air, heavy and out of his hands. Alan kept telling himself he was just a lowly supply errand boy, but the townsfolk wouldn't hear it. They cheered his merchant debut, praised his snacks like they were legendary, and sent him straight to the best deals in town. Their wild enthusiasm hit him like a wave, and he couldn't turn down their kindness. With more and more people shouting his name, Alan suddenly understood how fast they were yanking him into their expectations. Alan got swarmed the moment the townsfolk spotted him, every single one pushing forward with special offers and loud, unstoppable encouragement, and he could barely keep his footing under all that kindness, all while cheers blasted through the air and left him reeling between heartfelt gratitude and pure shock. When he finally came back, Ine gave him credit right to his face, asking in a calm voice whether his shopping went smoothly. Alan slid the bill in front of Ine and watched her double-check the numbers, making sure every digit was locked in. She stared at the bill in disbelief, instantly sensing it was way past their budget. But when she checked again, she realized the twist. This deal was actually 20% cheaper than normal. Suspicion flared, so she grilled him for answers. Alan explained that his acquaintances cut the price as a favor and swore up and down there was nothing shady going on. Alan let out a heavy sigh, realizing he never meant for things to spiral this far. As Aina turned to leave, she suddenly stopped and hung there for a beat. Shot him a quick look with a soft smile and admitted, yeah, no matter what, he'd earned her respect. Alan cut through the smoke with a calm, unshaken stare. Japan felt calm and safe, like nothing could ever shatter that peace. Clutching a letter from Seiyaji, he stared at the words like they were alive, wondering what brutal fate Japan was about to swallow as the weight of the document crushed his thoughts. The crew finally burst into the royal capital. An enormous, heavily fortified city sprawled across the land like a living fortress. After that grueling journey, they were finally hit with the news. Starting that day, Laneburg would be their new base of operations. Their fresh team house was already set up, and everyone was told to sprint to their assigned room and double-check it themselves. Alan got asked whether, once his current missions were done, he'd finally make his way to Japan. He nodded along without blinking, but his gut kept asking, "So what exactly do you want from me?" All they gave him was a blurry promise that he'd understand once he got there. Right before he left, they told him to watch out for himself, and even as he walked away, doubt gnawed at his mind. Alan touched down in Japan right away, but the wild commotion swirling around him rattled him to his core. Cars and people packed the area, and the whole place felt heavy with tension. Then he spotted Genji in the crowd, the same familiar face who greeted him warmly after their long time apart, while Alan stood there, totally thrown off, trying to figure out what on earth was causing all this chaos. Alan learned from Genji that the villagers were from the Seoji group, and they'd been hunting for him for a full week. Alan didn't know who they really were, but he chose to face them head-on, armed with caution and a steel-hard resolve. He stormed up and spoke out, determined to uncover why they'd been hunting him in the first place. Alan didn't even get a word out. One woman approached him, and with just a small nod from him, she confirmed who he was on the spot. She shoved him into the car and pointed out how brutal the heat was outside. Then the air turned thick fast, and a nearby stranger sparked up a cigarette, signaling that this tense encounter was about to blow up. Inside the car, the woman admitted she'd fought tooth and nail just to track Alan down, and even cracked that finding cigarettes around here was a nightmare. She introduced herself as Kamiki Akira and told him, straight up, to just call her Akira, and then she practically whisked the talk toward that letter from the Sao-Jai family, pressing Alan and quietly letting slip that he knew far more about the young lady than he ever bothered to say. Inside the car, Kamiki snapped that the target was locked down and immediately called for backup. She told Alan, "Stay cooperative, and I promise you'll come to no harm." With a calm, icy stare, she warned him that the goal was simple: go home with every limb still attached, leaving that threat suffocating the air around them. As the car tore down the highway, Alan leaned in and fired off a question about the Seoji group. Akira laid it out. This wasn't some small-time company. It was a powerhouse running the big game in information tech and real estate, operating across Japan and overseas, and basically crushing it like a giant conglomerate that held power in sector after sector. Long ago, the Seoji family ruled Tokyo from sheer wealth, their power exploding under Ryujin Seoji's command, while the Kamiki family, Akira included, served them faithfully for generation after generation. Akira had been glued to that young lady since their middle school days, inseparable through it all. Later, he finally started working full-time at the Seoji household. She remembered how that young lady always went for her tea first, and swore it was the best cup she'd ever tasted. Akira poured tea for the young lady, and before the silence could settle, she smiled and insisted they didn't need all that formality, just the two of them. It was obvious they were tight when the young lady casually leaned in and asked whether Akira had recorded the show. Koi. Akira nodded, and the young lady urged her to watch it together that night. So with Akira finally staying for good, she grinned warmly and agreed, ready to do every bit of her mistress's wish. As Akira braced for Shizuku's comeback, she heard the noise outside roar louder and louder. A servant burst in with urgent panic. Shizuku was gone. The shock slammed into Akira so hard she froze, then dropped the tray in a blur, and it shattered across the floor. It hit all at once. Pandemonium exploded as everyone pushed for answers about Shizuku's vanishing. Questions exploded in the guard room over their failure, and whether someone screwed up, so Akira sprinted straight to the security room and tore through the camera footage. The recording captured Shizuku standing in the courtyard, right there in plain sight. But just like that, she was ripped away, gone without a trace. Akira told him they'd been hunting the missing young lady across the whole world, sending in top-tier experts everywhere, yet somehow still coming up empty. No matter how hard they searched, they turned up nothing, until Alan finally cracked and confessed, admitting he'd fooled him earlier. Akira shot him a quick apology, then slammed it down. "All right, Alan, your turn, you're explaining everything." Alan got marched into this huge, modern building and nearly stopped in his tracks, shocked to find something this high-tech right beside Akin Village. Alan was shoved into a room, straight to a man stationed by the window, arms folded, waiting like he owned the place. Then the escort snapped that Alan had been brought before Chairman Ryujin. The man tilted his head, pressing the question, was Alan really who he said he was? Alan answered with a calm, solid yes. Ryujin studied Alan right in the eyes, like he was hunting for proof, and Alan lined up perfectly with the description his daughter had written about. Alan felt that man's intimidating aura slam into him, and before he even thought, he stepped back, wondering if big company people always radiate power like that. Ryujin laughed it off, told Alan to quit hovering on eggshells, and made it crystal clear he knew Alan wasn't the kidnapper. Alan, still wired with tension, couldn't shake how hard that encounter hit him. Then Ryujin stepped in, confirmed the letter was real, and suddenly it meant his daughter was alive, and that Alan really was trusted. He tells them the letter couldn't be forged, because it's packed with secret family codes, and it even spells out Alan's looks in detail. Even though Shizuku vanished 3 years ago with guards everywhere, the truth is out now. Her survival is locked in. Ryujin got a handwritten letter from his daughter, and it landed right when he had no idea what to do next. In it, she spilled that she had a collaborator and begged everyone to back him up. Shaken by her words, Ryujin spun toward Alan, hunting for answers he might be hiding. Alan paused, then sprinted through one last check, making sure there was no surveillance anywhere, before Ryujin told him the room only had a one-way mirror with 0 recordings. With security already tight and tension snapping like a wire, the guards yanked their guns up fast. Then Ryujin stormed in and barked, "Lower your weapons." Alan snapped, unveiling his power and summoning a blazing, glowing gate right in front of them. So sudden and unreal that everyone froze, unable to even speak. Alan blew open his gate, and it straight up linked to another world where Ryujin's daughter was waiting. The revelation hit everyone like a thunderclap, and their jaws just dropped. He went on to explain it like a rule of the world. Only he could squeeze through that gate, because not a single other living thing could cross it. Ryu stared at the mysterious gate again, awe slamming into him as he fought to accept what he was actually seeing. Alan pointed across the way and said that on the other side was a whole fantasy world, where his daughter had seized command of an adventurer crew, and he'd fallen into the role of her subordinate. The moment the truth hit, Ryujin froze in shock, staring at the reality crashing down in front of him. Ryujin didn't buy the impossible at first, but the moment he saw the gate, he threw his doubts out the window and trusted Alan. He shoved a smartphone into his hands, demanding proof, one photo of his daughter. Without hesitation, Alan agreed and took the job, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility slam down on his shoulders. Ryujin admitted he couldn't be sure what Alan was really trying to do, but there was no denying one thing: the letter was real. With gratitude blazing in his eyes, he thanked Alan and ordered him to pass along his regards to his daughter. Alan nodded and sealed that trust with a solid, no-nonsense handshake. Shizuku calmly leaned in and asked Alan straight up if he'd ever met her father. Alan couldn't believe it. Ryujin had left the city and traveled to the countryside all by himself, and the number of people who showed up in the village where Alan was staying was overwhelming. Shizuku just nodded along, remembering what it felt like to be the successor back then. Alan then told me Ryujin handed him a smartphone and demanded he snap Shizuku's picture as proof. Shizuku snatched the device, spun the controls like a pro, and proved Alan's suspicion was spot on. A recorded message from her father blasted through the room, calling her by name and confirming, straight to Shizuku, that she'd made it. That message hit her like a warm blanket, personal, reassuring, and it lit up her smile because it sounded just like her father. Meanwhile, Alan stared at the device, stunned by the picture quality, blown away by how crystal clear everything looked. Shizuku gripped her phone tight, moved to the core by that message, her eyes turning soft with emotion, while Alan quietly realized it was pretty rude to watch. Shizuku later paced the halls, brow furrowed, hunting for where Alan had vanished, because she meant to hand the phone right back. Alan finally caught up with the group right when everyone was gathered, and the second he was there, they burst into excited chatter about the smartphone. The whole team whipped out their cameras, shouted for everyone to come in close, and got ready to snap pics together. Shizuku, still a little stunned by what was happening, got swept right into it as everyone insisted she jump in too. Alan raised his smartphone, watched the countdown tick down, and then snapped the photo at the perfect moment. The whole crew formed a tight line, with Shizuku standing dead center like the eye of the storm. As the device snapped their photo, everyone lit up, capturing one bright, happy moment together. Alan finally started settling in with the group, but a few people still felt out of reach, and Shizuku wouldn't let him forget it. He had to get comfortable with their brand new base of operations, too. Then she brought up the Royal Capital Bazaar, this huge weekly blowout where merchants from all over the country hauled in rare treasures, shaking Alan's curiosity awake, even as the group's adventuring had to pause for now. Alan dove into the Royal Capital Bazaar and found it packed with stalls, from everyday commoners all the way up to nobles. Want the details? He couldn't stop wondering, did this event let anyone slip into a stall? It was the kind of proof that screamed. He couldn't wait to see where this could go. Alan got the application form for the Royal Capital Bazaar, but now he's stuck, panicking over what on earth he should sell. As he got lost in thought, Lazuli, Ryuka, and Camille came back and instantly clocked that he'd drifted away. So they leaned in, desperate to know what he was really up to. Alan tried to slip away, panicking that his presence would instantly make the whole group feel uncomfortable. Still, the girls jumped in and reassured him. Nobody believed that old way anymore. Looking back, they finally admitted the truth. Up until now, not a single decent man had ever shown up with them, and that's exactly why they doubted everything at first. The girls clocked Alan standing there and realized the captain's been way calmer ever since he joined. They opened their doors to anyone who could boost the brigade, and even Aina sang his praises. One said he was like a younger brother, and the next threw him a curveball, calling him more like a father figure, leaving Alan stunned for a second, then quietly exhaling with relief as they finally accepted him. Alan kicked around the idea of running a stall at the bazaar, just as a quick test to see if it even worked. Stuck with no clue what to sell, and no way to pay for anything expensive, he chose to sell sweets right then, because it was the quickest move his brain could grab. Alan wrestled with what would actually sell at the bazaar, while the others pushed him to bank on something nobles would crave. After thinking it through, one of the girls burst toward the shelves and snatched a book right off them, throwing it out as a bold idea. The whole group lit up at the book the captain pushed on them, dreaming about reading non-stop and even picking up Japanese along the way. Alan suddenly saw entertainment gadgets as a smart move, until he realized books might burn a hole in his wallet. Watching their dreams collapse, he agreed to stock at least a few, and the moment it was settled, their spirits shot up. Alan replayed that promise in his mind, already feeling the disaster it was about to unleash. As he tore down the road toward the city, adrenaline pulsed in his veins. He couldn't stop wondering if Chairman Ryujin truly bought the proof he'd handed over. Then when he finally arrived, everyone greeted him like they'd been waiting for his answer all along. Kamiki, Alan's new attendant, stepped in and introduced herself with a bright, eager promise to work by his side, but right as she reached to guide him, Alan suddenly bolted out of nowhere, leaving her frozen in shock. Alan was still rattled from what just happened. He swallowed his nerves, apologized, and practically exhaled with relief when it looked like Ryujin finally believed him. Kamiki verified that Ryujin was genuinely thrilled, especially once that mysterious ore Alan had hauled and hit the scene. Was written off as a mysterious unknown substance, so there was zero room to doubt him. Alan didn't just get help, he got everything. Full support for his stay, legit identification papers, a move-in ready place with all the essentials, and a black credit card with no limit. Then at last, they handed him the keys to a brand new bank account, and his jaw dropped when he saw it already stuffed with a massive fortune. Alan was flooded with support, but every single helping hand came with a catch. They demanded his help, pushing him to master his powers and unravel the secrets of that mysterious gate. More importantly, he had to jump in and help Shizuku in every possible way. Alan was dragged into the spotlight and demanded to cooperate. Still shaken, he nodded fast, agreed on the spot, and promised everything right away, like a weight finally slipped off his chest. Kamiki leaned in and told him, loud and clear, "Now I've got you, I'll handle your safety and help," pushing him to ask for anything he needed without holding back. Alan strode through the city right beside Kamiki. He stared at the truth. He barely knew Japan's present, and he was desperate to forge real connections. He laid out his plan to open a store, aiming to spark a whole new network in the royal capital where he had zero connections, and Alan made it clear. He wanted to build his wealth with his own hands, not just lean on handouts from the outside. He figured that winning the nobles' favor would lock in steady money and priceless connections, helping the brigade right along with him. So Kamiki caught his sincere determination and felt a wave of relief, then leaned in to ask what he planned to buy. Alan finally spotted what he'd been hunting, burst out with excitement, and pointed straight at it: card games. Kamiki looked doubtful, but Alan snapped that in a fail. There was nothing to do, no entertainment at all. So yeah, something as simple as trading cards or board games could snap everyone's attention. But even if he wasn't sure which one hit harder, he just knew these games would shine, even under the nobility's nose. Alan realized the Sioji group was everywhere in business, including trading cards, and Kamiki just confirmed it, then casually had a whole warehouse of their cards delivered. Alan stared in shock at how effortlessly it was dealt with, and then it hit him, for Kamiki. This enormous order wasn't meant to be real yet, it was just a test run. Alan shot Kamiki a grateful nod and thanked her for everything she'd done. And he said he'd handle it alone, snagging sweets and books, until Kamiki dug in his heels and insisted on staying right by his side. Saying his safety came second to her future, Alan clocked how stubbornly determined she was, and decided to let her stay. Alan wandered into a packed little store where books, CDs, games, and manga were stacked everywhere. He stared in awe at those shiny modern DVDs, dumbfounded by how paper-thin and tiny they were compared to what he'd ever seen. Stunned, he held them up like CDs and realized, holy hell, everything had flipped since his days in Akin Village. His eyes snapped to a massively popular game called Yumkoi. He recognized the name, and even Seoji loved it, too, and then it hit him. Everyone was talking about it, a loud sign that the world was changing fast. As Akira scrolled through the pages, her mood suddenly dropped. Nostalgia hit her like a wave, and she admitted Shizuku once begged her to watch Yumkoi together. It never happened, but that memory still clung to Alan like a bittersweet weight, leaving him totally stuck on what to say or do next. When Akira finally clocked just how hard it hit her, it all sank in. He couldn't even bring himself to face Shizuku head-on. But somehow they finally accepted this. Being their servant didn't always mean staying glued to their side. Alan listened in silence, soaking in her words like they mattered, and then she handed him something meant for Shizuku, telling him to deliver it, and he nodded, feeling every bit of weight in what she said. Alan and Akira brainstormed non-stop on the perfect way to entertain people, then landed on a brilliant plan to stash manga and dramas on a tablet for pure convenience. When Alan shot her a glance, his mind instantly insisted she looked just like Seoji's older sister. Right after that, they reached a house, and the moment the door swung open, it felt like their whole next chapter just kicked in. Alan finally got the green light. The permit for the stall he'd been planning to open was in his hands. And he confirmed everything ran smoothly, no glitches, no drama. Even though they couldn't ship the items right away, they locked in a delivery plan to land them on the exact day of the event. Later on, he mapped out where his stall would be, right on West Street, number 13. The choice left him stunned, right on the doorstep of the Central District, and he couldn't figure out why. They said the Western District had always been the royal capital's heartbeat, where merchants flocked and deals were born. Alan heard a wild rumor swirling around the Central District. Locked behind towering walls, it sheltered the highest nobles, always out of sight, never letting commoners even catch a glimpse. Word on the street said certain nobles were slipping into the bazaar in secret, so you could spot them near the Central District. Alan and Ryuka leaned in and traded whispers about the rumor that nobles were slipping into the bazaar in secret. Ryuka knew if it was true, the whole place would explode into chaos, and he couldn't shake the fear that Alan might be fishing for exactly that kind of spotlight. But he only smirked, leaving her hanging, staring at the truth she couldn't read. Then she laughed, and the moment kept exploding. Realizing his approach was downright fascinating. Then she told him she couldn't wait for the day to come, and even though Alan was totally confused, it felt like she was toying with him. Alan sensed something was wrong, but he forced his heart to settle, and he figured there was nothing left to do, so he just sat tight and waited for the appointed day. With grit in his bones, he decided to wait and see what fate would throw at him next. In the royal capital's heart, the bazaar erupted with stalls and merchants pulling in a sea of people, while fireworks crackled overhead and noise filled the streets as the big event kicked off. Right in the middle of all that chaos, a young man tightened his grip and made sure every last detail was ready. With nerves of steel, he stared straight ahead as the grand marketplace roared to life, where top-tier goods and non-stop deals would steer the whole day. The young man snapped his stall together and got ready to sell. He'd set his sights on selling chocolate, but he didn't show up empty-handed. He also picked out a few books to offer selectively and grabbed trading cards just because the mood hit. The bazaar was already roaring with chatter and chaos. Even though the big event was still hours away, he watched it all unfold in front of him. He spotted the upper class crowding in among the growing mass, and it hit him. The day's business was already off to an amazing start. He planted himself at his stall with unshakable grit, ready to grab the moment, even with fancy stores towering all around him, and he was sure his products would prove they were worth it. He thought they'd finally meet on equal ground, and for hours he just simmered under the scorching sun, staring as the minutes bled away, 0 visitors coming near his booth. Even with all his determination, the truth hit hard. His stall sat empty, and not one single customer ever showed up. While the other stalls pulled in customers left and right, his sat ignored, like the world skipped him. He started to panic. Was it his lack of sales skills, or were his products just too weird for anyone's taste? And right then, doubt swallowed him whole. A face he recognized instantly showed up, and Albert's jaw dropped when he realized it was the one he never expected to see here. He learned Albert rolled into the royal capital for a business meeting, so he decided to hit the bazaar on the way, and what started as light teasing between them quickly turned deadly serious. Albert stared in disbelief. His acquaintance actually turned into a real merchant, and the trade was booming, even with rivals circling around. When they grilled him for advice, Albert didn't just talk. He hit them with real perspective. He laid out the brutal truth about trying to sell something people don't know, especially food, and said giving out samples could break the ice, even if he fully expected this polished crowd to stall and hesitate before tasting anything. Hearing Albert lay it out, the young merchant finally saw the truth. Go for the middle class and the future bazaars, because this thing keeps happening every time, and that route gives him the best shot. He leaned in and told him, "Don't lose heart, this afternoon session is about to kick off." And the young merchant nodded, realizing he still had a mountain to learn. Albert leaned in and reassured him, saying business rises on two things, killer product quality and trust, and he was sure his rival already had both. As their chat wound down, Albert slipped away, thanked him, and turned before the moment could drag on. Sure, they joked about how small the shop was, but what he said still landed with real weight. Right before he fully left, he stopped and threw out one final piece of advice. But hey, chasing those business goals is one thing. You might also stumble onto something way more meaningful on the way. As the day dragged on, a couple customers wandered to his stall, but the looks on their faces told him everything. It was going nowhere fast. He replayed his dream of striking it rich through sheer grind, but Albert's words about chasing something bigger wouldn't let go. As night crept closer, he shut down the stall the moment his companions finally showed up. Right then, footsteps crashed closer, and the crowd jolted, eyes widening as whispers exploded about this unexpected newcomer. A jolt ran through the crowd when a young boy in fancy clothes swept in, flanked by armored guards like a royal storm, instantly stealing every eye in the place. The way he carried himself screamed, "Not ordinary," and when people leaned in to whisper, they didn't hold back. He was the eldest son of Marquis Castellano. The young merchant could barely wrap his head around it. Why would someone so high status show up at the bazaar? The young heir then swept through the market, eyeing every stall like he was hunting secrets. Whispers ripped through the crowd in seconds, sealing the rumors that his disguise wasn't fooling anyone. Then the merchant snapped the moment he understood, a wave of pressure crashing in as he clenched his teeth and stayed composed. Soon the noble youth came to a sharp stop in front of his booth, staring him down with keen curiosity, then blurted out loud, wondering what kind of stall this was. The merchant puffed out his chest and proudly paraded his wares, bragging that each piece was a rare treasure from across the world, especially the candy and the toys. Among the goodies, chocolate stood out. He praised its strange, unmistakable scent, then offered a taste to the young noble. Even when the guards snapped that a kid like him had no business eating from a commoner's stall, the boy brushed them off, and if anyone challenged him, he promised he'd step up, handle it, and talk his way through. Curious, the young noble leaned in and demanded to know more about that bizarre confection, and the merchant spilled every detail. How they crushed cacao beans into a rich paste, blended it with sugar and vanilla, and then let the whole thing set into chocolate. He studied the instructions on how to hold it so it wouldn't melt, then carefully took a bite. That rich aroma and insane taste hit him like a truck, and for a second he just couldn't speak. While the merchant fretted, wondering if the flavor might have been too much, the noble's eyes sparkled. He took a bite, grinned, and declared it absolutely amazing. The merchant finally let out a breath, snapped the price into place, 30,000 gold for a pack of 8. To everyone's shock, the young heir spotted the intro price and went, "That's it." Then immediately said he'd grab every last one, paying on the spot with zero hesitation. A young noble dug in his heels and demanded to pay more than the set price, insisting it was a little reward for being genuinely pleasantly surprised. Curiosity burning, he leaned in and quizzed the seller about what else was on the stall. Then the merchant slid over confeito, a sugar candy, and right after it, caramel. He tried yet another sugary treat, and the noble got instantly hooked. So he leaned in, demanded every kind he could find, and bought it all on the spot, no hesitation. Before he even realized it, the noble had burned through a fortune. His purchases stacked up fast, pile after pile. Spotting a stack of paper bags on display, his curiosity suddenly snapped into focus. The merchant leaned in and said he had trading cards for sale, random packs of 5, perfect for a game where you craft decks of 40 and then go head-to-head with other players. With the rules stamped inside the booklet, the noble's eyes lit up like fireworks. Then he decided he'd buy every single pack of trading cards, no exceptions. As soon as he opened it, he stared in awe at the intricate design, completely blown away by how gorgeous the artwork looked. The quality blew past his wildest expectations, and suddenly those cards felt way more precious than he'd ever imagined, like real treasure. With the prices sitting there, totally fair, he figured they'd make perfect souvenirs, while the merchant in the background, wrestled with a quiet mix of gratitude and uneasy disbelief that he'd been trusted so easily. By the end of the day, that stall was wiped clean. Every single product was sold out and gone. With gratitude blazing in his eyes, the young noble bowed and thanked the merchant for delivering such a meaningful experience. Then, when they asked for the merchant's name, he smiled and said, "Alan." Before Alan could leave, the noble thrust something into his hands, then flashed a warm smile and promised they'd meet again someday. Alan replayed the whole day in his head, and it hit him hard, too overwhelming to ignore, too impressive to forget. When he stared at the gift left behind, a strange piece of metal suddenly sat in his palm, and he had no clue what it meant. Right as he started to think things through, his friends burst in, shocked to find the stall already gone. The energy snapped back in an instant as they greeted him with big smiles, stunned at just how fast everything disappeared. Alan's friends groaned as they finally showed up late, wishing they'd gotten more time together. Then one of them confessed she'd been dying to crack the next volume of Yume Koi. To everyone's shock, Alan shoved Volume 3 right into their hands, causing their eyes to sparkle with pure joy, turning the whole moment into something heartfelt and leaving the day on a bright, cheerful high. His friends started roasting him for keeping that book secret, then pushed for a group read later. Yeah, even their captain had to join in. Alan burst into a warm laugh at their excitement, his real smile lighting up his face, and as he listened, Albert's words came rushing back. Maybe this shared joy was the something else he was supposed to find beyond his purpose. Late into the night, Alan hunched over his desk, locked in on his work, lit by a soft lamp glow that made everything else fade away. Just when the room felt like it was holding its breath, Sioji showed up out of nowhere. At that hour, no less, and her comment about his dedication hit him hard because he was still up, still grinding at work way past midnight. Alan admitted he'd stayed back to update the ledger while everyone else kicked back and read together, and then Sioji, who only came to grab some. She stopped short and grilled him right there at the royal capital bazaar about how the day went, demanding to know if anything went wrong. But Alan, flustered to the core, admitted everything that had gone down, then breathed out, saying it all turned out fine, and dodged the details, promising he'd explain it all later. Alan couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off inside him. He ditched every other dream and went straight into the merchant life, chasing one thing, an endless fortune, convinced that this game was made for him alone. Even though that was the plan, he still got hit with wave after wave of people thanking him, and that didn't match what he'd set out to do. So it threw him into a restless, uneasy spiral. Sioji slid a tiny box into Alan's hands, claiming it was a token of gratitude. He shut it down, then demanded to know if she'd even heard the doubts he laid out earlier. Calmly, she nodded and said yes. When he cracked open the box, a necklace sat inside, so beautifully delicate that he froze, mouth hanging open in stunned silence. Alan lifted the necklace, and that jewels-blazing rainbow glow left him completely speechless. Sioji told him it was a rare gem, an actual channel for magic, and even then she had to admit one thing: no gift could ever fully capture how grateful she was. He told him that no matter why he became a merchant, his choices had helped her find her way back to her family, and to Akira, and she'd never stop being grateful whatever his motives were. Alan let out an awkward chuckle, remembering how Chairman Ryujin once said the same thing, teasing that father and daughter were basically twins in spirit. Sioji's tone sharpened as she looked him straight in the eye and spoke to him directly. With a steady stare, she handed him the weight of it all, telling Alan to protect her father and Akira from this moment on. Alan nodded and agreed to Sioji's request, promising to do everything he could, and when he saw how much she mirrored her father, he couldn't stop himself from replaying their words in his head. Sioji doubled back, thanking them again and swearing she'd cherish that gift like it was meant for her. As Alan nodded in quiet agreement, the young noble hurried back from the bazaar, grinning like he couldn't stop replaying how amazing the day had been. When he finally rolled into town, someone snapped at him for slipping in again, quick and sharp. But he grinned anyway, shrugged off the scolding, and flashed his real play. A gift he'd brought back, hoping it would finally calm the whole mess down. Cheerfully waving goodbye, the young noble promised he'd be back tomorrow. Then he was gone, leaving everyone behind. The gift holder stared at the box in awe, turning it over like a mystery, chocolate sealed up and waiting, his rare find from the bazaar, quietly sitting on a bench in their hands. Alan rolled the mysterious metal between his fingers, and each metallic clink sent a quiet shiver through the room. Lost in thought, he stared at its wild design, like it was trying to tell him a secret. Then someone nearby snapped to attention and recognized it on sight, a Pramaka medal, and suddenly that random gift didn't feel random at all. Alan barely had time to breathe before Camille slid in, smiling bright as she ditched a break from training, and right on the spot, he grabbed her attention and showed her the strange medal he'd gotten earlier. Camille clocked it instantly, and surprise hit her hard, like she already knew exactly why it mattered. Alan and Camille were soon ushered to join everyone for tea, but all he could think about was getting answers about that mysterious medal. The lively energy surged around him, and just like that, the moment slipped right out of his grasp. A whole lineup of colorful, perfectly shaped sweets sat waiting on the table, and their playful designs sparked instant excitement and non-stop curiosity. The whole crew crowded around the table, devouring the cookies. Alan had slipped them like a sweet little victory. Those adorable sweets, tiny animals made of sugar, lit up faces with big smiles and sparked non-stop playful curiosity. Laughter and light chatter filled the room as they admired the designs, savoring every bite and every second of it. Yet while everyone basked in that warm glow, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong, even as calm finally settled over them. During tea, the talk spun straight into the bazaar, so when someone pressed Alan about his results, he admitted it was a total win. Mostly because one person had snapped up every single thing he was selling all at once, and everyone nearby practically gasped in shock. Alan added that the very same person had also handed him those mysterious medals, and now the whole group was buzzing as they demanded, "Show us." Some people didn't buy it for a second, but Alan swore up and down that it really happened. The crew leaned in and scrutinized every inch of those medals, then froze, because they weren't just metal. They were rare gold and silver pramica pieces worth a fortune, and curious Alan immediately blurted, "So what are they really?" Then came the breakdown. Pramica medals were the golden key to restricted zones, even secret dungeons, the kind of access nobody gets unless they've earned it. They were only for folks officially recognized by the guild, and grabbing even one, especially the shiny gold one, was almost impossible for regular people, which is why Alan holding all of them felt unreal. They revealed the silver medal Alan was clutching came straight from the academic district, opening the exact academies that carried the same emblem. Camille shot back that she had one too, tied to that district, and when they traced the emblem on Alan's silver medal to the Infui Magic Academy, it meant Alan could slip into and out of the Royal Capital's academic district anytime he wanted. The gold medal's exact origin stayed a mystery, but everyone suspected it traced back to the Central District. So for now, the others urged Alan to march to the academy and find out who had handed it to him. Alan stared at the medals and it hit him. These weren't just trophies, they could be a straight-up invitation. The thought of facing the Marquis's air solo made his stomach churn, but to calm his nerves, Camille offered to escort him. She already knew the maze of the academic district like the back of her hand. Camille snapped up the chance and swore she'd be his special guide, and Alan, finally breathing again, accepted her help with real relief washing over him. Alan stepped into the academic district and stared at the massive grounds stretching out before him. Camille leaned in and said this was the Royal Capital's biggest district, packed with tons of academies and even government research labs. With her right beside him, Alan finally let out a breath, because he knew if he'd been alone, he could have gotten lost fast without her steering him through. Camille dashed ahead toward the checkpoint, waving Alan along, yelling for him to hurry before the gift he carried lost its perfect chill. Alan hurried after her, flashed the medal to the gate guards, and just like that, no trouble, they let them through. Soon, they tore across the bridge and pushed into the heart of the buzzing academic district. As they pushed deeper into the district, Camille's excitement kept surging, while Alan stayed silent, soaking in every corner like something was off. Like this place had ripped them out of reality and dropped them into a whole new world. Camille snapped his attention to a towering building up ahead, the Grand Cathedral of Sandra K's religious school, the only religious academy hiding inside the royal capital. Alan leaned in as Camille laid out the lessons from religious school, medical skills, holy magic, and healing magic included. But healing was the kind of advanced training that demanded serious power and precision. She said Nana, the vice leader herself, also graduated from that same kind of school. And yeah, Nana didn't just bring the holy magic, she could heal too, a crazy rare combo, so rare people actually started whispering that her power might even beat the captain's and Alan. He was seriously blown away by how huge her reputation and skill really were. Alan stared at the ceiling and realized he still hadn't talked to the vice captains. Both of them were probably swamped, and decided to keep his distance from Raffian because that guy hated men. He couldn't stand not knowing, so he grilled Camille about where she came from. She admitted she'd studied at Leo Tall Magic Academy, the kind of school that lets commoners rise. Alan's jaw dropped, because he never even knew there was a magic school hierarchy at all. Camille said magic power and talent usually runs in the family, so nobles flock to top-tier academies while commoners get stuck in low-class schools, and that's exactly why they're headed for N5 Academy, one of the most elite places on the map. It was made to forge and amplify the bloodlines of powerful sorcerers, so even stronger heirs could rise from them. This whole system was the backbone of how the Canilus kingdom flourished, and Alan couldn't shake the feeling that it was magic supremacy in its purest form. Yet it still didn't quite feel real, until Camille suddenly pointed out that the academy was right there, moments away. Alan and Camille finally stumbled up to the N5 Magic Academy, and wow, the place rose before them like a massive castle, towering into the sky. Alan couldn't stop staring at how huge everything was. At the gate, he flashed his Pramaka medal and demanded, straight-faced, whether his companion could get in too. The guard nodded and told Alan to flash his right hand, and as he did, a glowing band snapped to life to grant him access. Alan was handed a magical security device that would watch his every move inside the academy, and they made it crystal clear. One reckless step, and the guards would come crashing in fast. As he strode beside Camille, he couldn't stop himself from staring. This place in Liathal's former shadows felt worlds away. Soon, Camille spotted the legendary Lion Dormitory, this grand, royal-only building that screams prestige and legacy inside the academy walls. Strolling across the academy grounds, Alan quizzed Camille about who they were meant to meet. She finally said it was Ray Castellano, the very noble who'd shown up at Alan's stall in the bazaar. The second Camille heard the name, she froze mid-step, her face twisting with pure, sudden dread. When Alan shouted to her, she froze for a split second. Then she lowered her voice and begged him to say it again, like her composure had just cracked for the very first time. Alan dropped the bombshell. Who they were meeting next was Ray Castellano, the oldest son of Marquis Castellano. At that exact moment, Camille's face hardened into stone, and silence swallowed her words as the revelation rattled her to the core. Out of nowhere, she spun around and sprinted off like her life depended on it, yanking Alan into silence, while he shouted after her, completely stunned and confused as she vanished. Alan yanked Camille back and tried to soothe her, but she fought like a storm, shouting for answers about how he's tied to that powerful noble. In her head, she couldn't ignore it. Meeting a family that prestigious felt like walking into danger, especially when she was just a commoner. The Castellano family stood among Magic Society's 3 great houses, and the mere thought of crossing them made dread spike in her chest. Convinced Camille had been played, she dug in her heels and refused to go, her rage flaring even as Alan kept trying to calm her down. The moment it hit, the air in the room went heavy and Camille's mood sank like a stone. Alan laid it out. Besides the royal dorms, the noble houses had their own quarters too. Since Ray Castellano was one of them, he lived in the Great Eagle Dormitory. Camille felt her head spin, and she hurried to slip away with an excuse, suggesting she could leave now that she had shown Alan around. But Alan shut that down fast. Without a Pramaka, walking out of this restricted zone could land her in deep trouble, and it left her rattled, flustered, and uneasy. Alan weighed it all and decided it felt way more believable to run into a knight, or someone tied to a fallen baronial line, than the heir of some marquis. But Camille was clearly shaken, refusing to accept what was about to happen. Alan's guilt crushed his chest, and he quietly swore to himself he'd apologize to her the right way later. The moment they reached the place, everyone met him with respectful silence, like they'd been waiting for him all along. Then they ushered him into a room and told him to wait for Lord Ray's return, and the air itself screamed that this meeting mattered. In the waiting room, Alan clocked Camille's chalk-pale face. She looked rattled, and her confidence crumbled fast under the weight of what was coming. Even as she fought to tell him she was fine, it was obvious she was cracking, like her spirit had slipped out for a second. Alan stared, worried to the core, wondering if she could survive another hit of this crushing tension. Then click, the door unlocked, and the moment that person stepped in, the wait was finally over. Ray lit up with a warm smile and told Alan, "Man, it's been way too long since we saw each other at the bazaar." Alan shot back with pure gratitude, thanking Ray for the invite, and Ray just waved it off with a calm grin, telling him to drop the tension, because it was Ray who reached out in the first place. As Ray spoke with fearless confidence, the whole room seemed to snap into place, and Alan felt the real weight of that moment slam down, while Camille stood right beside him, quietly trembling with tension. With the whole room vibrating in tension, one of the nobles couldn't help it and blurted out, "So who is Alan, really?" Ray casually waved him in like it was no big deal, calling him a friend. but the way he said it sounded like he wasn't totally sure. Alan froze on the spot when that remark hit him, his face locking up as his mind scrambled to make sense of the sudden introduction. Alan snapped to it. He was the only one standing under that noble girl's piercing stare. Cold sweat burst out as dread crawled up his spine, and he kept asking himself if he'd messed up somehow. He shot a desperate glance at Camille, begging for help, but her face said it loud and clear. In this moment, she couldn't save him. At the meeting, they pulled out a special gift, sweet treats made just for the moment, the kind you can't buy in shops because they're a storage nightmare. Alan took the items from his hands and leaned in, eyes blazing with curiosity. They asked if they needed to be cut, and everyone told them, "Nope, you're already portioned and set." Then, in a blink, everything was lined up, neatly arranged and ready to be shared. Akira pushed a fruit tart into the spotlight, its bright colors glittering like pure jewels. Alan lit up with pure joy, savoring that treat like it was made just for him, while everyone else stared at it like it was something truly special, though not everyone at the table felt the same excitement. Camille looked downright uneasy, her distress clashing hard with the room's wild, lively energy. Ray Castellano finally threw his name into the room and admitted he was only in his first year of junior high at the academy. Chris Elisha sat right beside him, sharing her name too, and Ray practically beamed as he told them how thrilled he was that his guests were truly enjoying those sweets, like all that work finally paid off. His upbeat chatter clashed with Chris's calmer vibe as she gently warned him not to go overboard. Even though he was the marquee heir, he carried himself like he didn't have a care in the world, playing it casual and trying, in his own way, to look cool no matter what. Ray noticed Chris still hadn't told her full name, and that tiny detail screamed that she was hiding something. He explained that commoners only went by a given name, while nobles carried both a name and a family name. And that's why Chris still had another name out there, one she never told anyone. When the truth hit, Alan froze in disbelief, realizing Chris's identity had layers she never let on. At last, Chris cracked open her real identity. She blurted her full name, Chris Alyssa Kane Lizzie, and then admitted she wasn't just anyone, she was the princess of the kingdom. Alan froze in pure shock when he finally clocked Chris's real identity, because she wasn't just someone, she was royalty. Turns out she wasn't just someone. She was Chris Alyssa Kane Lizzie, the kingdom's second princess. And Alan couldn't help but freeze in shock, because why on earth would a girl of her rank be standing here in the middle of all this chaos? Chris's father hailed from a bloodline linked to the Castellano family, and his insane magical power won him a spot in the royal family when he tied the knot through marriage. Because of it all, Chris, yes, even though he came from a branch family, still had the royal bloodline right to claim the throne, and the reason was crystal clear. She was the awakened one from the royal bloodline, and her magic power absolutely dwarfed even the old kings. Ray made it clear, among ordinary people, some are born with insane magical power, and it has nothing to do with bloodlines. Then he snapped his gaze straight onto Alan, and that confident smile said everything, because Alan was one of those rare, no-guessing kinds of people. Alan froze, Ray's words kept slamming through his head, and the Zane religion's teachings. People call the awakened ones the creator God's divine kids, eyes wide open, minds sharp beyond ordinary folks. Ray even admitted his request might have been out of line, but he still pushed hard because he desperately wanted Alan to meet Chris. Alan replayed the talk in his head and suddenly snapped to it. There's no way that princess wasn't reincarnated too. Then it hit him. Every strange encounter today and every twist of truth wasn't chance at all, it was all set up on purpose. Alan's chest filled with doubt. He knew he couldn't stay quiet when nobles came knocking, but he had no clue what the right move even was. Chris calmly told her that being an awakened one didn't automatically make you special, and that Ray's situation came from accusations that weren't tossed around for no reason. She leaned in and told Alan, reincarnated folks are freakishly rare, and even the strong ones usually top out around a Viscount-level threat. Then her sharp eyes narrowed like, "So tell me, am I reading this wrong?" Alan stood there stunned and let her words sink in deep. Ray nodded quietly because Chris was right, and it finally clicked. Even though they looked young, neither of them felt like a normal kid for even a second. The air itself felt like it carried the weight of wisdom way older than they were, leaving Alan with the brutal realization that he wasn't dealing with normal people. He was facing a whole different league. When the meeting finally wrapped up, everyone clapped hands for one last time and traded quick farewells. And just like that, everyone started filing out. Then Camille suddenly looked shaky, her body swaying as a wave of dizziness hit her hard. She made up a quick excuse about needing fresh air and slipped outside, and Alan watched her go, his gut twisting with worry, praying she was really okay. Inside that quiet room, the whole world somehow went silent. Camille stayed quiet until Alan burst in and shut the door behind him with a sharp click. With determination burning in her chest, she asked if they could talk for a while, and Alan didn't even hesitate, admitting he had something to say to her, too. He couldn't help it. Alan stood there, face to face with the princess, trying to keep calm while he addressed her with every ounce of respect. But silence turned his nerves into a live wire. She snapped the tension with one question and told him to lift his bangs. He looked confused, but he still did it. He yanked his hair aside, bared his full face, and both of them froze, trapped in a totally unexpected moment. The princess kept buzzing with excitement, demanding that Alan lift his bangs again. Then the instant he did, she lit up and compared him to Hakuba Issei, her idol and the star of the social game Wonder Stage. In her eyes, Alan wasn't just a match. She was sure he was Hakuba herself, reborn. Alan stood there, completely baffled, staring in disbelief at the fact that somehow he looked just like a character from a game. As the princess rattled off every way Alan matched Hakuba, her emotions surged and she couldn't hold it in. His height, his golden hair, his emerald eyes, even the way his voice rang, everything lined up flawlessly, like the universe designed him just for her. Overwhelmed, she looked back on everything she'd fought through and realized it all slammed into this exact moment. Something inside her ignited, like the connection she'd been waiting for had finally snapped into place. At the university, Sakaki Habara Yui, second year and brimming with confidence, rattled with pride as she strutted around in her Ita bag, flexing the one she'd built for an upcoming concert. Her friends instantly clocked Hakuba Kayan, the brand new outfit, the fresh gacha, and the event had just dropped. And while everyone else got hyped, Yui froze with worry. How was she supposed to juggle her part-time job shifts and grind the event when she'd already blown her money on live shows? Her friends, used to her non-stop obsession, said she hadn't changed one bit. Then someone cut in, telling her to shove thoughts of college aside for now. Yui's whole day spun around her idol. She lived on tight money, skimping on simple meals just to save a little more, and somehow every boring hour still felt worth it as long as it kept her supporting. Surrounded by friends who championed her tiny sacrifices, her days felt steady and golden, until that normal happiness slammed to a stop, flipping her fate into something she never saw coming. Chris spilled the truth. If she wanted wealth, talent, and beauty, she'd have to erase Hakuba Kyun's very existence. The idols she once worshipped were gone for good, trapped only inside her heart, taunting her with painful memories of that shining time. Choked up with emotion, she finally admitted how hard it had been, then steadied her breath and insisted, to herself and everyone else, that she was okay now, even with her voice shaking and her whole body trembling under the crushing weight of it all. Harris said meeting someone who looked exactly like Hakuba Kyun had to be fate, because somehow, fate still dragged him into another world anyway. Alan tried to shut down the comparison, but right before he could finish explaining, that sharp tension snapped through the air, and Chris stumbled forward. Then the two crashed together in a clumsy, total shock moment. Alan slammed onto the ground just as Chris crashed on top of him, and Alan's whole body jolted in pure shock. Before Alan could even catch his breath, Chris surged closer with a burning, strange focus in her eyes, commanding him to stay perfectly still. Yet that sudden change left him rattled, like she'd just snapped into a whole new mood. Chris's sudden fire crushed Alan's nerves as she shoved him down and swore there was nothing to fear. But Chris instantly freaked out, seeing just how deadly it all was, especially with a princess acting like that in the middle of nowhere. Even though he'd been reincarnated too, he still couldn't believe her raw power. No matter how hard he strained, he couldn't break free. The room was soundproof, so his screams for help never stood a chance, and he was left trapped, powerless and screaming into silence. Flustered but dead set on winning, Chris snapped that she might not have real experience, but her training was perfect. And then she leaned in with strange intensity, urging Alan to stop fighting, swearing that if he just focused on distracting himself, this would all be over fast. Pinned flat under her weight, Alan could only let out helpless groans, his whole body shaking as the fight spiraled out of his hands, until she finally overpowered him completely. Chris suddenly lost her footing and crashed onto Alan, and the shock hit them both at once. Before anything could even kick off, Camille burst in and caught the entire scene in the blink of an eye. Chris heard her shocked scream ricochet through the room, and in the next heartbeat, dizzy and completely overwhelmed, he fainted. Later, Chris dropped into a deep bow of apology, burning with shame for losing control. Alan was still confused by how everything unfolded, but he breathed a huge sigh of relief because Camille stepped in and stopped it from going worse. because he couldn't stop imagining what would have happened if he'd been left alone with that chaos. Alan leaned in and demanded to know, did Sakakibara get reincarnated, or did she get yanked into this world instead? Sakakibara pointed out that her earlier words didn't sound like a simple transfer at all. They felt way more like possession, because this time only her consciousness had slipped over, not a full reincarnation. Sakakibara said the merger didn't just swap memories. It fused her mind and Chris's together, stitching them into one identity where her now felt like her consciousness and his blended into a single self. This wild blend is what she claimed sparked the most unstoppable otaku girl in the whole kingdom. Alan leaned in, listening like it mattered, because this was the first time he'd ever heard of anything like this. And he admitted he didn't fully get it, even as he realized this was also the first time he'd ever met someone like her. Because of her role, Sakakibara had to admit she couldn't just stroll outside like everyone else. Since the people in that world were ridiculously attractive, her nerves around them only fueled rumors that she was weird and terrible at socializing. Ray swallowed the truth and kept everything about Seonji to himself for safety, because as he sat there thinking, it hit him. He'd lived 20 years without ever crossing paths with an awakened one, and if this strange turn hadn't happened, he probably never would have. After their deep back and forth, they both nodded and admitted it. No matter how heavy that conversation felt, they were genuinely happy they'd met. Ray leaned in and promised he'd keep their talks going as fellow Japanese, and even said he'd send a letter of support to her brigade. Chris erupted with joy, like he'd finally gotten the world to say yes. Then, in the middle of her excitement, she slipped and lost her footing. She blurts out Hakuba, but the second she realizes her slip, she scrambles to fix it, right as Ray awkwardly points out the name isn't that, it's Alan. Camille jolted back to consciousness, one breath at a time. She blinked, totally thrown by where she was. Then Ray's face lit up, relieved she was awake, and he hurriedly asked how she was feeling. Still foggy in the aftermath, she grabbed his nerves and promised, "I'm okay," even as she remembered she'd met Ray and the princess right before the world went dark. Camille replayed the moment she met Ray, the princess, and Alan gripping the memory hard until the world went dark again, and she swore it all really happened. They said she'd passed out right after she left the room, and that whatever happened must have been one wild dream. Ray confessed he'd tried to pull a trick on her, and guilt crushed him for pushing her too hard, while Camille still couldn't shake the doubt, secretly wishing it had all been nothing but a dream. To make up for the mess earlier, she was handed the next volume of Yume Koi, and just like that, her mood shot up. With a bright grin, she forgave him on the spot and clutched the book to her chest. Even when they teased her that she could walk on her own if she felt that alive, she shot back that reading Yume Koi was non-negotiable, because without it, she'd collapse again. He watched her light up, then quietly took it, because if Camille was his savior, paying this little cost felt like nothing. Even with things finally feeling calmer lately, Alan was still yanked into a meeting with the captain. He burst into the room, and right away, a stern woman stood in his way. Her piercing stare pinned him in place, and then she demanded, no hesitation, what exactly he'd done. Her voice turned razor-sharp and accusatory, and the whole atmosphere snapped tight with tension. The young man stared at the papers in his hands, utterly stunned. He spotted the signatures of heavyweight influencers, the second princess and the Marquis family, and his mind snapped. How did they even manage to win that kind of power? The calm woman in front of him didn't flinch. She confirmed every mark was real, and told him everything that had happened to make it all possible. The young man panicked that he'd messed everything up, convinced he'd just ruined her whole plan. She didn't dodge the truth. She admitted it, and pure gratitude hit her like a weight lifting off her chest. With a sharp, serious tone, she shifted the conversation and demanded to know why they'd really stopped adventuring. She laid it out plain. In the royal capital, you don't just make it. You need serious connections, a supply line that never breaks, and craftsmen who can actually deliver, and all of it collapses if you don't have credibility. In the regional cities, they had local lords to lean on, but when you reached the capital, it was a whole different beast. Even with all that skill, her group got thrown out. No matter what she tried, every noble and merchant she dealt with turned out shady, and the cruelest part was how her hard work kept getting sabotaged just because she was a woman. The crew went hunting for the man's support, determined to win him over, handing him a slice of the profits from everything they were pulling off. He brushed off the offer and said bluntly that money meant nothing to him. Then he leaned in and hinted he wanted something totally different in return. The man dropped his real demand. He wanted her as his mistress, and if she refused, he'd take one of her beautiful companions instead. Fuming, her ally snapped with rage. but she clenched her teeth and kept her composure. She snapped, "I'll never sell myself or my comrades," then shut the meeting down and strode out with pride, treating the whole thing like it never even happened. As they stormed out, the man's fury burned hot over their defiance. As she strode off in complete silence, she clamped down on her frustration like it was a bomb waiting to blow. She admitted they survived this kind of treatment before, but this time the mocking was so blatant it was the first time it really hit them. Her companion, shaken by the cruelty, could only admit it was pure disgrace. She couldn't stop thinking about how women were mistreated again and again, and how it wasn't just happening in the royal capital, but all the time. It hit him hard. This all-female crew had probably clawed through countless hardships because of it, and now he couldn't help feeling guilty for even complaining. She swallowed her pride, apologized, and admitted her past had left her drained. But still, she could see there were good souls like him out there. They tore apart what happened to the man they just handled, Alex Barn, the Barn Company chairman, linked to that struggling Knight family. He ran the routes between the royal capital and the nearby towns, so everyone feared his power, because he was influential enough to make you hope, and dangerous enough to make you regret it. When they spotted his exhaustion creeping in, they didn't just warn him, they pushed him to take a breather before he burned out. Morning hadn't even fully arrived when she was already buried under a mountain of paperwork, her desk crammed tight with documents. He clocked the workload swelling and couldn't help but wonder, had things gotten worse than before? Then another companion burst into the room, stunned, and the truth hit. Their duties weren't shrinking at all. Without having to chase outside connections anymore, their responsibilities had only piled up even harder. As Alan burst in with those documents, a rush of people intercepted him fast. News hit the air that a ton of folks were dying to meet them. The vibe flipped the second it was revealed that, thanks to him, they'd won support from both the Marquis and the second princess. And that shocking backing hit like a spark, turning every rumor into instant attention. Alan was told, explain everything later, while Anna got the job of greeting the incoming guests. Dazed out of his mind, he could barely process how fast everything exploded out of control. Meanwhile, people noticed that Princess Chris, who almost never shows up in public, was watching them like she cared about their growing bond, and that only made everything feel heavier and more dangerous. As their adventures were about to kick back off, she told him they'd need his help to lock down and stabilize their base. He was the brigade's one and only merchant, guarding the supplies, running the trades, and keeping everything moving. Because every fight spat out monster loot they could dump through the guild for fat commissions, she'd rather have him handle the sales himself. So the real money stayed right inside their crew. She admitted they didn't have the manpower or the know-how to push any further, so for now, things would stay exactly as they were. Still, she promised she'd make sure they had enough hands on deck. Then, worried he might drown in the workload, she pressed him straight on it, only for him to flash a grin and say he was thrilled to stay busy. As she accepted his answer, she said his name softly, like she was really thinking it through. She stared at her journey and remembered the moment she'd said it felt weird being thanked for something she'd done purely for herself, like that was just the usual deal for an adventurer. That plan to get back to her original world didn't stay simple. Everything shifted, and now she was focused on what was right in front of her. And her loyal companions stayed glued to her side, no matter what. He nodded, letting her iron resolve sink in. Beaten down and exhausted, she let out a shaky sigh of relief, because the long day was finally over. Even as talks rolled along with ease, the non-stop parade of visitors drained the life out of her. Even after all that progress, frustration still gnawed at her, because some details stayed locked away even now. They talked through next month's routine meetings, where every team leader would come in and lay out the latest updates. Even if it sounded routine, this was his very first time walking into it, because he'd always been chained to the job as the only one on the supply team. With help finally locked in, he could jump into the work at last. So she tested him right there, asking if he was really good at calculations, because every time she watched, his numbers looked terrifyingly precise. Even though he hesitated, he finally confessed. He wasn't doing it all by himself, other people had his back. Still, she handed him the accounting documents, and he took the job on the spot. No pushback, no hesitation. All alone, he grinned and dove right to work. Then, with a flick of his hand, a computer materialized out of thin air. Then he started hammering the keyboard at breakneck speed, calm, grinning, and smug as he admitted it wasn't just raw skill that made him so fast, but the modern little shortcuts he quietly depended on. As he scanned that spreadsheet, one section screamed, "Too expensive," louder than the rest. Potion upkeep ate up his time, and he realized the real efficiency came from Akira. She showed him exactly how to handle those tools. His job constantly dragged him to Japan, where he tracked down products, traded hard info, and backed the gate research. Potions are the real worry here. He can't stop thinking about how the gate keeps chewing through his magic, draining his energy and locking him out of using other spells. To fuel his research, he'd brought herbs and potions from the other world. And right when he was about to dig deeper into what they really did, his phone suddenly started ringing. The timing jolted him, like someone was watching, until Akira suddenly appeared out of nowhere, freezing him in pure surprise. At the Seiyuji Group's top-secret research base, the Leaf Institute, Alan was met by Yoshida, the lead botanical scientist, who greeted him like old friends and told him, smiling, "We've been waiting for you." He wasted no time and started to explain the newest developments, but Alan cut in and insisted it was exactly the right moment, because he'd come to get an update anyway. Yoshida dove into the science of potions, showing how the liquid slipped into cells, lit up the nucleus, and cranked up regeneration, boosting the body's healing like it was on overdrive. Potions didn't just help. They supercharged your body's natural recovery and swapped in temporary cover for the injured spots, so wounds healed way faster. He couldn't help but notice something wild. Those herbs had genetic ties to plants on Earth. Yoshida made it crystal clear. The plants by themselves just weren't strong enough to wreck the human body that badly. It all came down to that mysterious power they called magic. And honestly, Alan didn't even blink. As he'd feared all along during those earlier exams, the truth still hit hard. Seeing other people outmuscle him shook him for a second, but he shoved the feeling aside and tried to act like it didn't bother him. They argued over how to coax medicinal herbs, stuff they hauled in through the gate, back to life. But yeah, even when some clung on, their healing power was way weaker. It's probably because mana is so scarce in this world. So finding a cultivation method that actually holds steady would be revolutionary. But almost every plant dies before anyone even gets the chance to study it. Yoshida couldn't stop thinking. Was the real boss fight more than just mana running dry, like some hidden twist still waiting to be uncovered? Yoshida dared to ask the big question. Could the plants in this world actually hold onto mana? And if they could, what wild consequences would hit next? To press on, he cornered Tsukamoto and ordered him to lead Alan through the facility. Alan was hauled off to a whole new laboratory, and more research was waiting to sink its teeth into him. Alan got handed a bunch of regular earth plants, picked on purpose because their genes matched the herbs from the other world. He was told to pour a little magic into one of them. Maybe he hesitated, maybe he didn't. Then the story cut off right there. The plant flickered with a faint, sudden glow, and the watchers went dead silent, stunned by the reaction they never saw coming. Even though the truth was invisible to the naked eye, Alan swore he could feel the magic in the moment, and he left the final verdict to the results of the test. The researchers nodded in gratitude, then promised him they'd send updates the moment the analysis wrapped up. They also warned that the man might dissipate, so he'd likely have to run the whole process again and again. While the finance report was getting prepared, everything started to shift. Nerves clung to him, and the upcoming meeting loomed like a storm he couldn't escape. For some people, it was their very first time there, and they couldn't shake the nerves of not knowing what was about to hit them. Feeling the tension in the air, Alan cracked the ice. He promised he'd jump in and handle things if anything went wrong, and somehow that made their fears loosen. She finally blurted out about the strange things he always carried, confessing her curiosity had been gnawing at her for ages. Then Alan waved it off and swore he'd explain later. But she kept pushing him, demanding a real answer since he'd never actually said anything clear. He swore he'd explained everything he could, yet that half-baked reply only made her suspicion burn hotter. Alan told her straight up that everything he carried was for the brigade's sake, and that she had nothing to fear. She watched him in silence, clocking that something about him felt off. Then her eyes sharpened as she told him, "You've changed," even though he looked totally lost about what she meant. During a meeting, Laffen leaned in and told everyone the dungeon intel near the royal capital was finally in hand, and she warned that in just 2 days, multiple teams would come to challenge them. Once her update was done, the whole group snapped into action and demanded the next report from the mage team. Nana said that ever since Alan joined the brigade, the place has been slammed with requests from male adventurers begging to get in too. Alan couldn't believe it. None of them even met the requirements, so every single one got rejected, and the worst part was finding out they handled problems like that, making him feel guilty. Then, right as one idea faded, a fresh recommendation slammed onto the table for everyone to weigh. They introduced Piana Ishin, born into a knightly family with serious healing magic talent. Even with doubts about whether she could truly meet their needs, everyone pushed back hard, because after 6 months of training, her real potential would finally explode. Everyone swore that only one of them had ever truly seen her secret talent, and that now was the exact moment to pull her in and make it happen. They greenlit the new candidate and locked her deal to match Nana's exact terms, because everyone trusted Nana's judgment. The meeting kept roaring on, blasting past the mage team's report and hitting the next part of the plan. Nerves jittered in the next speaker's chest, but determination drove them forward. They announced that even after the chaos from the day before, the supply negotiations finally got locked in and fresh blacksmiths were secured. With every new report, a few people swallowed hard and fumbled through their updates, clearly terrified to speak, sending Alan spiraling back into those brutal office days that still haunted him. The tension in the air kept climbing until Alan shot his hand up and blurted out, "I've got something important to report," and every single eye snapped to him. Alan stepped up and laid out the brigade's brutal, high-potion maintenance costs. To crack the problem wide open, he showed me the brand-new container he'd pulled from his connections. No more bulky glass bottles. These were light as a breath, built to last, and way easier to carry so he could slash costs without sacrificing anything. Alan said these new containers, thanks to special processing, can stretch potion storage to 4 times longer, so a batch can last up to a whole month. His shocking claim hit the group like a punch, because potions usually last only a week, so doubt exploded into chatter, and everyone started grilling his credibility, until one person snapped back that a bold lie like that would never hold up. He slammed for silence, and everyone had to stop, because you don't miss what he was about to say. They decided to put both the old and new potion containers through the ringer for the next month, just to prove Alan's claim once and for all. He nodded in an instant, snatching the opportunity to prove himself. No one raised a word of protest, so the meeting wrapped up, and everybody got a sharp reminder to take the details back to their own groups. After the meeting, Alan finally exhaled. Good news. The potion maintenance problem was moving right on schedule. Then he quietly logged a promise in his heart to thank Yoshida and the research team. Not long after, his eyes locked onto one blooming rose, and the moment he saw it, he knew it meant everything. He finally admitted it. Everything now rode on that fragile sign. Researchers finally spilled their results. Roses came out on top, hoarding magical particles and working in a way that felt just like medicinal herbs. Other plants had already hurt humans, but roses, those fiery little beauties, still held real promise. They begged Alan to bring them into the other world and nurture them there, and Alan didn't even hesitate. He jumped right in. Alan brewed up extra rose samples, testing if they could stand in for medicinal herbs. The moment he poured his magic into them, the rose warped and twisted, colors snapping into new shades as it glowed with a faint, eerie light, and he knew right away the weird change was on him. He couldn't stop himself from pushing for more experiments, wondering if throwing more magic into the mix could speed up their development. Alan slid up to May and asked her for potion-making guidance, acting all humble about how little she could teach her. He agreed to help, and this time he dropped a bombshell. The herb wasn't ordinary at all. But instead, it was something weird, a pseudo-herb that lit up her curiosity like a spark. May stared at the strange plant and admitted, hand on her chest, she'd never seen anything like it before. Curious as hell, she blurted out that Alan was practically never out of the middle of a mystery. When they pressed him about potions, he admitted he only knew the basics. Then she flashed a grin, urged them to roll up their sleeves, and insisted they take a shot to see what results they could pull off. May cracked open the whole potion basics, 4 colors, red, purple, blue, and green, and each one came in 3 grades, meaning there were 12 potion types in total. By grade 3, green was barely any help, just for small fixes like chapped skin, while purple could kick in depending on the grade and even regrow damaged body parts. Their squad would usually burn through blue potions, but they stayed away from green, because Nana could already handle the healing, so why waste it? Then Alan found out the green stuff still hits deeper than they thought, and he couldn't believe it. While they were debating potion types, May leaned in and said purple potions demanded rare herbs that only grow in deadly places, so rare they practically never show up on the market. These were the top-tier potions humanity could ever craft, legendary stuff that hadn't been seen in over 10 years. Curious, Alan leaned in and demanded answers about those mysterious red potions. They called it the blood of God, the red potion, and they swore Icar could resurrect anything with it even at grade 1. Even in those early ranks, it could knit back fatal injuries and leave its user feeling reborn again. But there was zero proof that a real Grade 1 red potion even existed, because it's rumored to be one of the rarest sacred relics of all, supposedly only showing up in brutal high-difficulty dungeons, and getting snatched clean out long ago. Alan watches the potion finish bubbling, and to his absolute shock, it reveals itself as a vivid purple brew, something he'd never brewed before. When they ask what it's worth, he realizes this potion on the black market could rake in a wild 5 million gold. This bombshell slams the room into silence, making everyone realize how unbelievably rare and priceless the potion truly is. Ine raises the potion and tells Alan, in the most unexpectedly cool way, that he's completely lacking common sense. Alan thought it was just another plain blue potion, but Ine shut that down. Growing medicinal herbs artificially is almost impossible, so this purple potion is downright extraordinary. She snaps right in and lays out the danger. Selling something this valuable would wreck their guild's reputation. Alan tries to claim the guild should take it to stop any waste, but Ine shuts him down hard. Handing out that potion as a lone individual would definitely unleash a massive commotion. Alan pushes back on the worry about public reputation, but Ine hits him with it. Selling potions outside the guild would make people think they can't run business worth a damn. Even the guild's own staff would buy into that mindset, and it would come back around and hit Alan straight in the face. Once he sees it, Alan knows this is a problem he can't ignore. Then Ine tosses out a daring plan: take a field trip straight to the black market. Because in the capital it isn't illegal, they could pull this off quietly without drawing attention. Seoji snapped at Alan, warning him that obsessing over every nuisance would drag him to a standstill. Alan couldn't believe it. She was still a high school girl, yet her maturity and calm presence hit him like a shock as he stared at her composure. Seoji made it crystal clear this had to stay hidden from everyone else, and to keep things running clean, she ordered Aina to go with him, leaving Alan totally speechless while Aina froze, shocked she'd even been pulled into the plan. Aina felt the weight of every decision crush down on her when she realized these talks could swing deals worth millions, while Alan straight up handed her the reins, trusting her to negotiate like a pro. As she reluctantly accepted it, Alan's memory snapped. An unresolved problem came crashing back to him. So he had 5 rose potions in his hands, but when it came time to figure out what to do with them, he just shrugged it off and kept everything to himself. Alan froze for a beat, realizing that this potion was worth a staggering 5 million. Yet somehow May's magic roses stayed hidden from him, and that only fueled his determination. He clenched his resolve and took the rest of the potions into his own hands. With that black market trip breathing down his neck, he hurled all 50 roses in at once, praying it wasn't the wrong move, but knowing he had no choice but to go on. Alan stared at the vial in pure disbelief. Then the liquid inside flashed a sickly reddish hue. Like a crimson potion, only now it had that eerie purple tint. Its amount had crashed so hard that doubt immediately hit him. Was this a failure? But the liquid just sat there, trembling with a faint tingling sting in the air. No evaporation at all, and it left him completely baffled by this weird outcome. Alan realized his potion wasn't the expected purple at all, and if he tossed it recklessly, it could seriously endanger everyone, because there was no purification facility to fix the mess. If they ever uncovered it, everything would explode, and he'd have no choice but to act. He made a desperate call: bury the potion deep in the wild, no matter what. Alan stepped into a barren, lifeless world, and the silence around him screamed louder than anything, empty, cold, and endless. He decided this was the perfect spot to dump that dangerous potion, so he moved in to bury it and bolted before anyone could catch him. Right when he was ready to strike, a gigantic structure slammed into the sky above him, blasting a blinding beam down like the heavens had chosen him. Frozen in shock, Alan stared as a colossal orbital lifter descended right before his eyes, like he was watching something truly unreal. Alan thought about burying the bottle, but the moment he looked around, he knew that spot was way too risky. So he hauled ass and left it behind, then slipped to a safer place while birdsong drifted across the sky like a quiet spell. Someone nearby clocked something was wrong and they snapped, "Hey, are you okay?" Alan blinked hard, thrown off by the sudden question, then rubbed at his eyes like they were burning and finally admitted he'd been getting nowhere near enough sleep. Aina clocked the exhaustion in him and snapped, asking if his nerves were keeping him from sleeping right, then stared him down like she was scared for his life. Alan, half out of it, tried to play it cool, saying he was an adventurer too and had to push through. Even with his apology, it was obvious this was his first time taking the brutal strain of working inside an adventurer's crew. Ine warned Alan that even though the royal capital's black market was safer than it sounded, His total lack of combat experience could get him killed fast, especially with his connections and that rare power to brew purple potions. Alan just brushed it off with a laugh, like it didn't even matter. But Aina smiled warmly and promised she'd protect him for real, then stepped in with pure determination to stay at his side. As Aina pushed Alan to hurry before they were late, he kept it all bottled up inside. She probably thought his sleeplessness came from nerves, but the truth was way worse. He just couldn't get any real rest. Alan shoved his exhaustion aside and told himself, focus, lock in, and get in the right mindset. Determination blazing in his chest, he sprinted after her, bracing himself for whatever storm was coming next. In the royal capital's black market, Alan and Ine slipped in like shadows to set up their stall. Alan shouted that everything was ready, but the truth was brutal. He barely had anything to show, just a certificate and one rare purple potion, and yeah, the place looked nothing like what they'd dreamed up. Instead of some creepy crime hole, it felt like a loud, thriving market street. Ina remembered the captain saying it wasn't illegal, yet the whole scene still clashed hard with what they'd pictured a black market would be like. Alan leaned in and listened hard as Aina broke down how the black market really ran. Everything here was legitimate, just kept out of the government's and guild's grip. So yeah, it was real, but you still had to be careful. If someone got tricked or got ripped off, the seller could shrug off any legal trouble, because they'd just dump the goods for way more than the guild's rates, while the buyers, desperate as ever, kept paying anyway. Alan nodded, admitting straight up that haggling just wasn't his game, and as the crowd roared louder, Aina clocked the moment. This was it. The event was about to start, and their real fight was finally beginning. The moment the black market doors finally swung open, a tidal wave of people surged in, shoving, shouting, and fighting for every inch to get inside. Alan and Anna got nearly pulled under by the raging crowd, fighting tooth and nail to stay upright. Seeing how packed the crowd was, Alan couldn't stop wondering if the black market was always this brutal. Aina couldn't shake the unease crawling over her the moment she got swallowed by the crush of bodies. As the chaos raged on, Alan couldn't stop wondering, what if he stumbled onto something truly rare? At the market, Alan shoved his item toward a buyer, and the guy snapped, questioning whether it was real. He even warned that those certificates can be faked in seconds, but Alan just stayed cool and flashed proof that it was the genuine deal. Still, the buyer tried to haggle, tossing out a lowball offer way below its real worth. But Alan clocked the pattern immediately and shut the unfair deal down hard. At the market, one of the buyers snapped in seconds, mocking Alan and grilling his companion for answers. Then the whole thing exploded fast as the man tried to light a full-blown fight. Ine stepped forward and snapped, telling him to get lost if he wasn't here to buy. Then she blasted, ordering him to stop meddling in their business. Her words hit like a command, sharp, unforgiving. So when he got called out that directly, especially by a woman, pride snapped and rage burst out of him. When the man lunged at Aina, Alan snapped into action, firmly clamping down on his arm to shut him down. He snapped a warning to the guy that he'd crossed the line, but the aggressor spat back with pure hostility, claiming he wasn't attacking anyone, just talking to the woman. In that exact moment, Alan slammed in one brutal, decisive punch, and that single hit shut the whole confrontation down instantly. Alan's punch detonated like a bomb, sending the man crashing to the ground, and the whole crowd snapped to attention, bursting into shocked gasps and nervous murmurs as they tried to wrap their heads around it. Aina's jaw dropped as Alan's sudden burst of strength hit her like a storm, and she just froze, face darkening while her mind scrambled to catch up with what was happening. Ine crumpled with frustration and embarrassment, shoving her face into her hands while Alan spoke quietly, begging forgiveness and admitting he'd messed up. He leaned in and told her, "In moments like this, trust me, just let me handle it." And the market instantly erupted with whispers as everyone gawked, judging the adventurer who'd lifted a hand at an ordinary civilian. Even with the tension crackling in the air, Alan couldn't miss it. Those potions were still flying off the shelves, yet the buyers kept stalling, afraid to go all in. His eyes locked onto the guild certificate, because that seal was the only thing that could make these risky trades feel safe. A knight strode up to Alan's stall with iron resolve, wasted no time grabbing the potion on display, and Alan blinked in surprise before accepting the deal with a grateful grin. Curious, the knight pressed Alan for answers. How did he even get his hands on something that rare? Alan didn't dodge it. He said he'd leaned on a few trusted personal connections. When they cornered Alan about restocking, he couldn't promise a thing, and suddenly the whole future hung in the air, uncertain as smoke. The knight snapped, "I'm Maxwell," and thrust a card into Alan's hands, then leaned in, hungry to buy more the second the potion gets restocked. He told Alan the guild would take care of the purchase no matter how high the price was, and that promise made it feel like a sure thing. Alan, jittery as he was, explained that potion prices can swing hard, monster surges, fights breaking out, and suddenly the cost could jump and double in value. But Maxwell waved it off, brushing aside any worry about unfair profit like it was nothing, and made it clear he didn't care about the deal at all. Alan stared at the truth. Purple potions showed up only once a month, and when wounds refused to heal, most adventurers were left totally helpless. Even healer circles barely had it. Regenerative treatment was so rare that only a tiny handful could perform it, and it cost way more than any normal adventurer could ever dream of paying. Maxwell straight up said the shortage was exactly why he'd pay any price, because if cash could beat the impossible, then it wasn't much to ask at all. Alan leaned in as Maxwell fired off why this potion mattered, and the memory hit him hard. His buddy had lost a finger the month before, and now Maxwell swore this could knit wounds back together. He pushed hard to stockpile as many potions as possible so they'd never get hit by another tragedy, and he counted on Alan to make it happen. Even shaking with nerves, Alan nodded and agreed. Maxwell then breathed out, saying today was his lucky break since most people were marching the same way, giving him the perfect shot to grab the potion. Then Alan frowned, suddenly curious and pressed. So what's happening today? Alan snapped to attention when he overheard that an elf slave had just been dragged into the market. But the details were almost non-existent, and the shock hit him like a punch. But he chose to treat it like a business move and a chance to read the market in real time. With the crowd roaring in chatter, Alan slipped through, watching everything unfold like it mattered. In the middle of the crowd, one person snagged his attention like a spark, locked eyes with him on the spot, and suddenly he was razor alert for whatever was about to hit next. Turns out, this country's slavery system wasn't at all what Alan first pictured. It wasn't a cage built for punishment or debt at all. It ran more like a real job, with salaries, work conditions, and even who qualified carefully kept under control. Alan was stunned to find out the slaves weren't dragged in by crime or bad luck at all. They agreed to the deal under strict terms, and to his shock, they could even get paid and pick the kind of work they wanted. They laid out the slavery system like it was all about consent and contracts. Workers got shoved into tiers. Tier 1 for deadly gigs like adventuring, Tier 2 for brutal farm labor, and Tier 3 for easy housework, while employers sealed the whole deal with binding magic to lock in silence and control behavior. Even with all those setups, the truth stays brutal. Most of the work still turns into pure hard labor, unless the person has some rare, standout skill up their sleeve. Alan then pressed about how rare elf slaves really were. Turns out their price was so insane it could soar to a staggering 10 million a month. In the chaos of a packed crowd, Alan couldn't shake one terrifying thought. Was that elf really here by choice, or did someone drag her into this sale? The crowd thickened fast, and suddenly the path ahead vanished from sight. Yet even after the warnings, Ine got swept away in the crush, and the moment the chaos erupted, the crowd surged forward like a wave, forcing Alan to sprint after her through the madness. Crushed in the middle of that roaring crowd, Alan fought to stay standing as bodies shoved and squeezed him along with everyone else. Dazed out of his mind, he finally clocked just how far the current had dragged them, and he couldn't even figure out where they'd landed. He shoved through the crowd and at last spotted Aina. Relief hit him hard. He shouted to her, but the moment she stood there, something felt wrong. She stayed silent, like her mind was locked on something far away. Before that roaring crowd, an elf girl stood still and unshakable, quiet as a whisper, but impossible to look away from, clutching a tiny book in her hands. Her delicate features and graceful presence snapped everyone's eyes to her instantly. Among the crowd, Alan and Aina froze. Her beauty hit like a punch, and their eyes couldn't look away. They even spotted the contract she was holding, with every term written out in crisp, clear words. Unlike everyone else, her terms came with 0 strings. No demands, no salary number, no contract end date, and not a single hint about what kind of job she'd take. That total absence of requirements hit Alan like a punch as he read the last line of the document, realizing how wildly unusual her situation really was. An elf stepped up in front of the crowd, gripping a contract that demanded 0 preference for pay, work type, or how long it'd last. Yet buried in the fine print was one wild condition: 1 red grade 3 potion or better. It was revealed that her companion was fighting a brutal injury, or something far worse. She pushed herself non-stop, racing across every hardship just to save him. That strange condition didn't just explain her motives. It carved her loyalty and determination into something unstoppable, so she stood out like nobody else. Alan realized the red potion was worth its weight in gold, and it hit him hard. This had nothing to do with money, not for him. That elf girl wasn't bargaining with a price. She was offering her own body as a sacrifice, and at this rate, he couldn't shake the fear that she'd end up paying with her life. Alan froze for a beat, thinking, if I give it a shot, I might finally cook up the potion that elf needs. His abrupt stop snapped Aina's attention, and he tried to play it off like he was just lost in thought. She narrowed her eyes, wondering if his concern was really aimed at the elf, or something else entirely. Ine leaned in, grabbed Alan's attention, and told him, don't try to haul every hardship you see on your back, otherwise it'll grind you down. She told him to save his compassion for people he could actually save. Alan drank in every word she said, and right then, both of them headed back together. And Aina's words hit him like a spark, pushing him forward in a way he never saw coming. He spotted his opening, and instantly zeroed in on the kind of people he wanted standing right beside him. He hated needing help, but when there was even a tiny chance, he decided it was worth going all in. Alan slipped up to a quiet house, hit the doorbell, and waited. An elderly man swung the door open, eyes widening with surprise, but a warm smile already forming. Then, even as Alan blurted out an apology for the sudden visit, the man gladly waved him in like he'd been expecting him all along. Alan finally got invited for dinner after ages away, but instead of kicking back and relaxing, he sat up straight like a soldier, face set in uncommon seriousness, and forced himself to finally lock in and make up his mind. He leaned in and told Genji, there's something important I need to ask you. Alan leaned in and asked Genji if he could borrow his land for a whole month. Genji agreed. He told them the road was just a barren wasteland, and Alan accepted it with real gratitude, thanking him from the heart, while Genji immediately pushed for a feast to celebrate. Alan somehow got access to a field, but the second he imagined farming for the first time, nerves slammed into him. Right when his worries started crushing him, a dependable helper showed up right on time. Alan climbed into the tractor, ready to jump in and help, and he thanked Keita for it then. He admitted he'd borrowed a tractor from his parents because they're farmers, then stared down the wild, choking overgrowth, and laid out his big, fearless plan, right there with Alan. Next week, he's planting 4,000 roses, and he's going all in for a harvest in just a month. His schedule was razor tight. He split the job into field prep, planting, mana infusion, and then the final harvest to fuel those potions. Tita stared at the wild, overgrown field, and dread sank in as she realized what kind of battle was waiting. Alan stayed locked in, completely certain they could pull it off, just staring that confidence down and not backing a bit. Keita's jaw dropped and he demanded, how did you know? Alan just smiled and laid it out with one unmistakable difference. The weeds swayed back and forth, like they were marking the line between the forest and the open field, and Alan finally caught on. These weren't weeds that fought back. Keita told them the field was probably just recently used, but farming still came with no promises. Then Keita snapped them out of their hesitation, and together they charged in, clearing the field piece by piece. Alan and Keita spent the day hacking through an overgrown field, clearing every last inch like it owed them answers, tearing up the weeds and driving that tractor nonstop until the whole field looked clean, smooth, and ready to go. As the sun dipped low, they called it quits on their hard work, smugly satisfied that they'd made real progress. After a brutal day of work, Alan and Keita were blown away by how much they'd accomplished. Joking that Alan worked like a human tractor, still, Alan froze for a beat, his mind screaming, is it really the right move to claim this land? Keita leaned in and reassured him, saying Genji-san had gladly agreed. Then Alan still noticed the field looked like it had been used only moments ago. While they finally caught their breath, Keita leaned in and said, Genji-san inherited a mountain of land. But pulling it off wasn't easy. Alan quickly felt the crushing weight of that responsibility. Keita, after snagging days off from work, practically demanded they hit the ground running the next day for Genji-san's sake, while Alan was stuck staring at the brutal truth they couldn't ignore. Alan hesitated because he didn't want to drag Keita into more chaos, but after that, he pushed forward and told her he'd handle everything by himself, apologizing up and down and swearing he'd repay her later. Keita was ready to jump in and help, but only for a few days. He demanded answers about why Alan was staying so far away, and it left Alan scrambling to get the words out about what he was feeling. Keita flashed a smile and said he was helping just because they were friends. Then Alan froze, completely caught off guard. He kept repeating it like it was brand new, and Heda reminded him, friends back each other up, even when Alan digs in and refuses to budge. For Alan, it felt weirdly magical, like his heart was on the move, because in Japan, it was the first time he'd ever met someone like that. Kata's face lit up like a firework when he leaned in and asked Alan for a favor, anything to help spread the love of anime. He even brought up people like Yumkoi, already in the middle of it, and Alan couldn't shake the feeling that he was the only one getting nothing, staring at the emptiness like, am I really the only one left out? Meanwhile, the moment slips into a calm little snapshot, a tiny plant holding a butterfly in its rest, while birds chirp away in the distance. Alan finally got all the seeds in the ground and brought the planting to a finish. He kept thinking about how much backup he'd gotten every step of the way. When Akira showed up, she blurted out an apology and admitted her demands might have gone too far since it was personal. Then she smiled and said just the roses were already plenty, and if he'd asked, she would have lined up everything, even the land. Alan tried to reassure her, swearing it wasn't like that. Then Akira handed him a drink. Alan took it and listened as she said she could make red potions, only if everything went right. Grateful, like he couldn't stop thanking them, he paused, swallowed his thoughts, and finally confessed he had something he needed to ask her, straight to her face. Akira confessed she'd tried to report the magic roses, but Seoji shut her down before she could speak, and now Akira can't figure out what Seoji is really up to. Alan finally saw there was no dodging it, and he agreed to hear them out. He squared his shoulders as Akira fired up the explanation of the Seoji main and branch families. Then Akira told them the main and branch families looked like one tight team, but behind the smiles they were rivals. Ryujin and the branch boss, Kawa, were cousins running the same company, and every deal turned into a silent battle. She let it slip that the bodyguard who'd once stayed by Ryujin's side. He wasn't just there. He was a branch family spy, and once he vanished, the secret info from that meeting got leaked to the world. The feud between the main and branch families ran deep, but somehow they still teamed up and ran their businesses side by side. Even with their rivalry simmering, both families still teamed up to run the business. Power and wealth were dead even. The only real split was whether they came from the main bloodline or the branch line. Ryujin ran sectors like it was a high-speed machine, automobiles, real estate, and IT, while Yukai kept the bleeding-edge tech rolling with genetic research, and though they split the work clean, their rivalry never took a day off. Alan discovered the Leaf Institute had fallen under Yukai's grip, and the branch family's rising power was starting to look dangerously unstoppable. Akira bowed to the Institute and admitted she owed them a debt, but she knew that the latest incident would only light the rivalry even brighter. The fight to rule the otherworldly industries was only going to explode, cranking the war between those two families up to a whole new level. Akira dropped the bombshell. Those otherworldly materials and magic-powered trades were raking in billions, and they were already turbocharging companies left and right. Alan fretted over being the only supplier, unsure if what they had going was truly enough. As he replayed it all, he finally understood. Ryujin and his crew had thrown themselves between him and the whole power struggle. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or guilty, but deep down he knew this was a blessing, because it let him stay worry-free. Akira hauled Alan to the place where the magic roses were growing wild. With a piercing stare, she said that a sealed-off village lets you control the flow of information, and it rattled Alan to the core. She shrugged it off like it was nothing but a joke, yet her dead-serious face made his stomach drop. Alan finally clocked it. Akira wasn't just planning something big. She was building a whole cultivation base for magic roses right here in Japan. She told me potions were worth gold, because even on the black market they could rake in steady cash. Alan nodded in agreement, then vowed to bury the elf's existence in secrecy, because he knew the preparations would drag on for months. Alan pushed ahead and told his partner everything Akira taught him about the Seoji family's mess, but his companion waved it off like it wasn't worth hearing. She figured the only play left was to put her faith in her father, dropping her worries and shifting focus. Alan snapped her focus to what he'd brought, something he couldn't wait to show her. Alan leaned in close to the rose, wondering if it was magical, but one hard look told him it was. He realized that just throwing magic at it wasn't enough, and she admitted she'd tried the same test, yet the plant still refused to mutate. If magic could boost herbs into making a purple potion all by itself, then stuff like that wouldn't be rare, or worth a fortune. She figured the key had to be hidden in each person's unique magical attributes. Even though Alan couldn't use magic, it still kicked up a storm of questions, because most people who get transferred or reincarnated come with a real skill and an elemental magic affinity, and his situation was totally out of the ordinary. She noticed Alan didn't seem to carry any special extras, though she couldn't be sure if it was real or just his skill hiding the truth. Then Alan admitted, shaky with uncertainty, that it was the first time he'd even heard about it. She swore she'd tracked down any new clue, and then come running to tell him everything. As he stared into his own Moongate power, watching living plants slip right through, he couldn't stop wondering what it really was. Alan stared into the unknown, realizing just how many mysteries still clung to him, and how little he truly had figured out. With those thoughts crushing his chest, he slipped through the grand halls and stepped out into the bright light. Yet doubt clung to him, loud and heavy, like it refused to let go. Alan decided to kick things into high gear and start preparing for more than just grabbing the red potion. Uncertainty crushed his chest, and he couldn't shake the fear that things might go wrong. As he strode ahead, Amade waited like a spark on a fuse, then ushered Alan in with flawless courtesy, thanking him for carving out time to show up for the meeting. Staring the woman down, he caught every word as she didn't waste a second. She went straight for the jugular, asking why he was even there that day. Alan sat down with a young woman and watched her eyes light up as she listened, hanging on every word of his story. The moment she heard about the elf slave, it hit her as wildly out of place, like it belonged in a light novel, not in real life. Alan tried to talk his way out of it, insisting he only wanted someone who'd keep quiet, but the moment the elf was involved, he couldn't force himself to ignore her. Even after he tried to set the record straight, the gap between them kept widening, like she'd already decided his logic was just the same old, predictable stuff. Still, she snapped the spotlight onto what she cared about most, steering the conversation like she meant it. Then she told Alan, straight up, not to pull away because the more he avoided her, the more she leaned in. That serious look on her face made his stomach drop. But the second Alan handed her the little gift he'd brought, her mood snapped into something completely different. With a grateful smile, she snatched the cream puffs and saw it clearly. Alan always had her back, even when it tangled him in trouble. And Alan, he didn't brag, he just admitted quietly and honestly that he'd been propped up by others just as much. She slid the cream puffs into a block of magically conjured ice, sealing them away so they'd be perfect for later. Alan stared in shock as he realized it was ice magic, and when she explained how flexible the spell was, perfect for storage and deadly as a weapon, he couldn't believe how practical and efficient it was. She told him straight up that what Alan just witnessed wasn't magic at all. But the moment she lifted even a fraction of that suppression, her own power surged back like it had been held back by chains. She let out a tiny drop, and boom, everything around her went stiff, even her tea, like time itself, got trapped. Alan stared in disbelief at the monster of power she'd been holding back every single day. Sure, she said it was convenient, but she couldn't help cursing the fact that the moment she slipped and lowered her guard, this kind of disaster always followed. Right in the middle of their talk, Alan suddenly brought up the elf slave, and the whole room felt it. He vowed to set up a home for her right in the royal capital. When someone asked why she couldn't just stay at the brigade's residence, he snapped back that it wasn't that simple, especially since the elf was there with her own companion. Alan warned them that openly keeping an elf slave was pure danger. Some countries straight up outlaw slavery, and if the brigade ever got shipped abroad, it would spark serious trouble fast. To dodge a whole lot of trouble, he decided the smart move was simple: keep her existence locked away from everyone else. The stakes hit him like a truck, because one slip could wipe everything out and cost him everything. Alan snapped to the truth and knew he had to lock in a safe place, fast, because trouble was about to slam in right after this. If they couldn't get the elf because they didn't have the red potion, then now, once they finally found where she was, some would rush to steal her by force, and the danger closing in only got worse with every single heartbeat. Alan nodded and agreed to step up, even knowing strong magical wards would shield everything, at a brutal price. And then, just when he thought it couldn't get better, she offered to foot the bill for his house, but Alan couldn't shake the fear it might spark a misunderstanding. Right before he could even stew on it, she cut in and told him she had one last request she needed him to hear. The elf leaned in and demanded Alan pick a new name, because that was the only way to stay invisible to the public in the brigade, while Alan's nerves screamed that it might be too hard. She leaned in with total confidence and reminded him, royal power wasn't just a title, it was a force where impossible didn't exist. She met his worry with a warm smile, thanked him for the help he'd given, and Alan still couldn't shake the thought, was any of this really okay? Alan got the word from them. A merchant guild card and registry would be ready for him, paper he could pull out any time he needed it. He couldn't help but feel grateful. He thanked her for jumping in, and she beamed, waving it off like it was nothing at all, right as they parted. Alan grinned and swore he'd pay that favor back someday. Alan stormed out of the meeting, fueled by pure determination, knowing the real challenge was about to explode any second. Moments later, he slammed into a fiercely guarded facility. Cameras snapped on, gates slammed shut, and guards took their posts, staring at the massive weight of all the measures put in place. He suddenly realized this was turning way more dangerous than anyone planned, so Akira snapped that secrecy had to be airtight. He slammed his point home, insisting those measures were the only way. He told him the truth about the other world would come out sooner or later, and this tight security was meant to shield Alan too. So yeah, Alan thought it was way overkill, but he still swallowed it and went along. Akira stayed locked in, telling everyone that if the village stayed under control, fear would never get the upper hand. Akira pulled the villagers aside and laid it out plain. This cultivation site was off-limits because they were tied up in joint development with the Sioji group. They still nodded and agreed, even though the shock hit them first. Then Alan finally understood she wasn't wrong, because he'd still have to step up and spell out the rest himself. Meanwhile, the roses kept surging upward, set to be harvested in just a week, if his magic held strong enough to make them bloom. Alan strode beside Akira, breathlessly saying he'd been pumping more magic into the roses lately, longer, stronger, and more often, because he was sure it would finally work. When they asked him to prove it, he snapped into action without a second thought and started pouring his magic straight into the plants. Alan surged with magic, pouring power into the air. The roses suddenly started to glow, dim at first, leaving everyone completely stunned. He admitted he didn't even fully get it himself. He only knew one thing: this weird phenomenon had just started popping up recently. Alan couldn't help wondering if the rose's glow could be measured to calculate magic power. Then he quickly admitted it was way past what he could pull off. The researchers from the Seiyaji group couldn't wait and kicked off their observations right away. Their hard work shone like a victory, even though doubts still gnawed at him. The cultivation duties were handed to the researchers, who swore they'd keep a close eye on every harvest. Later, Alan was. A girl slid up to him and thrust a sealed letter into his hands. She'd been hunting for him until the letter revealed a shocking twist. It was from a real estate agent. Jumping into it way sooner than Alan ever expected caught you off guard, right? He suddenly got it. This was all about getting ready to move because he was planning to buy a house soon. Alan said there wasn't any big secret behind the sudden move. He just felt it was the perfect opening for a fresh member to jump in. The fact that Alan was already sitting on enough money left everyone staring in disbelief, but he waved it off like it was just business, because to him, every customer was just a customer. For the others, it was a whole new universe, something they never could have imagined, and it hit them so hard they couldn't even catch their breath. Alan still hadn't spilled his plans to the captain. He held his tongue, waiting until everything felt more solid and certain. He didn't hesitate for a second. He bolted off to handle the matter himself. He sprinted off without them, leaving the rest stunned, everybody wondering what on earth was going on. Alan got led through the property by the agent, step by step. The moment he saw it, pure joy exploded in him. He practically declared it his temporary dream home. Alan stepped into the house and got pulled through its maze of rooms, ending up in the study. He clocked the stunning natural light and fresh airflow, and he couldn't stop admiring how perfectly the whole space was designed. The whole place looked fresh and untouched, exactly the kind of spot the princess would pick. So he just stood there, quietly stunned, like his brain couldn't catch up. Alan stumbled on a hidden bath tucked inside the house. The agent leaned in and broke down exactly how it worked. By soaking a special stone in magic, water would gush out on command, and Alan could boil it without breaking a sweat. Stunned, he turned and thanked her for explaining it. Alan Marvel stared at the house like it was from another universe, asking himself if the toilet was decked out with high-tech upgrades too. But after a quick check, his excitement crashed. Turns out his expectations were sky-high. Right then, a voice shouted his name, snapping his focus over instantly. Alan fumbled out a confession. Yeah, he'd been dying to see how big the place was, and the moment he said it, he realized he was acting just like he did back when he stayed at an inn. After double-checking every detail, he threw the doubts aside, pushed forward, and demanded they move ahead with the contract. The agent nodded, then bolted out to get every document they'd need ready. Alan burst outside the house. He looked back at how far he'd already come, still chasing that red potion and not one step closer yet. When it finally hit him, dread crushed his chest. If his plan fell apart, he'd be stuck living here all by himself. Alan snapped out of it and refused to keep replaying it. He decided to wait and deal with everything next week. He couldn't stop himself from wondering, what kind of person was she trying this hard to rescue? Alan finally got the promised guild card from Shinjo. He stared at it, and his jaw dropped when he realized it had been issued under the name *Hakuba is ****. Shinjo snapped at the rare chance to slip into a whole new identity. Alan leaned in and demanded to know what Krems was really getting at, while Shinjo started breaking it down step by step. She said both merchants and adventurers use the exact same guild card ranks, 5 rungs total: iron, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, climbing from the lowest to the highest. Shinjo laid it out. Adventurers climb by mowing down monsters or surviving lethal dungeons, while merchants rise on the size of their business and how much tax they pour into the system, and most guilds. They'll only let you reach platinum rank. Alan didn't just follow the rules. He discovered a secret level hiding beyond the official system, a special rank nobody talks about. Alan finally cracked it. Krems was sitting at the very top, the highest rank in the guild. He got his rank named after the rarest ore on Earth, because this title isn't like any other. All it took was the royal family's word, though they didn't hand out that approval to just anyone, only the big trading companies that had poured massive contributions into the kingdom. With a jolt, Alan realized that rank was the exact title the leaders of the country's 2 biggest trading giants, the Marquis Trading Company and the Peddlers Guild, held in their hands. As everything spiraled, Chris pushed straight into her uncle's chamber. King Romanus Fay Caneless III of the Caneless Kingdom apologized mid-step for interrupting and faced him head-on. He looked stunned and demanded to know what was really eating at her. Chris proudly handed her uncle, King Romanus, a delicious foreign sweet she'd tracked down, and curiosity hung in the air. He stared at the round pastry and it looked like a stone, but when he touched it, it felt weirdly light. She leaned in and said, "It's called a cream puff, this sweet little delicacy from a whole other land." The king took one bite of the cream puff and instantly got hooked by how light it felt, how sweet and fragrant it smelled, and how that soft, sugary filling left him stunned by an experience he'd never felt before. Stunned, he blurted out how on earth Chris pulled off getting a prize like that. She said it came from a merchant she'd only just started protecting. Then she leaned in and teased that she wanted a favor from him about the whole situation. Chris demanded the merchant get a fresh family register and new status, under a totally different name. The king clocked the merchants were dealing in rare treasures, but he still zeroed in on one thing: how enormous their whole operation was. Chris argued that when talents this rare exist, you can't just toss them into the open, because weak merchants, their families, and everyone around them could get targeted, threatened, dragged into hostage situations, or even snatched away by force. Chris tossed out the name Krems and claimed it as the merchant's brand new identity. The king nodded on the spot, saying that once his wife and daughters got those sweets, almost nobody would dare fight the decision, no matter how fast things moved and no matter the worries about stirring up objections. The king figured it was smarter to shower that kind of talent with rewards than risk them packing up and slipping to another country. And to him, this wasn't just about sweets. It was a way to lock down something priceless for the kingdom. Those simple cream puffs held way more power than they should have, pulling anyone they touched straight into the spotlight. Alan suddenly understood. This had blown way past anything he ever imagined. With their new status locked in, buying land would suddenly be a breeze, so much so that the guild could even hand over unlimited loans with no collateral at all. Alan was stunned, thinking he only wanted to climb to silver rank, but this whole thing had already blown way past that point. Alan figured maybe something flashy was exactly what he needed, because the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He thanked Zinju for everything, tearing into her help for the house and way beyond that, and promised he'd pay her back by granting whatever she dared to ask for. Embarrassed, she froze mid-sentence, insisted she only meant something she could buy, yet his words stopped her cold and she just stared, shocked that he'd actually said it at all. Shinjo shoved a disguise in Alan's hands to match his new fake name, Hakuba Ise, and even though he hesitated, he finally nodded and agreed to wear it for a moment, just to humor her demand that he put on at least a piece of the costume. Alan jumped into the Magic Rose harvest, hurrying to apologize for the trouble, and she waved it off, telling him everything was perfectly fine. The researchers showed up because they chose to, so everything ran smoother and tighter. And while Alan helped with the harvest, he leaned in and listened as she spilled their plans for what came next. If everything clicks, they'll pull off one more harvest before the year's even over. Land talks were already in motion, and she figured Alan would just keep cranking out potions, though he admitted even the simplest ones were more than enough to keep him going, and pushed them onward, barking for speed so the harvest would be done before noon. Even the harvest, and the loading right after, got wrapped up fast enough to make everyone blink, and the researchers were practically glowing with excitement. He practically burst with excitement, shouting that everything was set, and he shoved everyone into gear to haul the materials straight to the lab. Alan, feeling a little overwhelmed by their wild energy, hurried after the others straight to the research facility. Inside the lab, the air instantly changed as one of the researchers stepped in. Now fully in the zone, he threw himself into the work and went dead serious, like nothing else existed. His focus kept slipping, and the way he carried himself felt nothing like the version he'd been before. He focused hard as he mixed everything, guiding each drop so it landed perfectly in the container. Then, right before their eyes, the liquid settled into a terrifying deep red. The outcome hit like a revelation. It was a blazing red potion, a powerful creation that screamed of something huge. Alan watched the progress unfold with quiet hope in his chest, but doubts still hung in the air. They were brewing a potion they swore could heal anything, like bringing back even the brain and heart. But when it came to the truth, it still felt impossible, because even the closest people to the work couldn't wrap their heads around what they were really making. The talk shifted to the potion's mythical grades. People swore grade 1 could resurrect the dead and grant immortality, but there weren't any real records to prove it, just foggy hints tucked into ancient texts. Grades 2 and 3 were lumped together, and the old authorities hogged the system, digging them up only once every few years. People also whispered that this potion could turn back the clock and leave users feeling reborn. Alan stared into the unknown, feeling the dread build as he realized how rare these potions are, and how, once the brain or heart is fatally damaged, there's no coming back. Even so, there were records of someone who'd lived to a whopping 150 years, proof enough to make the rejuvenation potion sound real. Even after he admitted the logic, someone pointed out this: purple potions could regrow lost limbs, so the legends about this potion might actually be real. The red potion's real power stayed a mystery, and that doubt gnawed at everyone. People feared it would glow with false hope instead of curing anything. Still, with nothing solid to back it up, people insisted that even a shaky shred of hope beats having nothing at all. Her companions clearly got it too. They saw the danger coming, but they still clung to the chance it offered. And Alan couldn't stop thinking about how everyone else must have felt while the world hung in uncertainty, because the weight of it was crushing. Even with their schedule crammed, they still admitted that learning the potions' effects might have at least brought them some peace. They only meant to make 2 bottles at first, but the result blew past expectations, turned out to be just a little more than they'd planned. Alan stared in awe as the potions piled up in just 1 hour, so many he couldn't even match in a full night by himself. The liquid was insanely pure, flowing smooth as silk, like something magical had slipped into the lab. As I watched it all unfold, one truth hit me hard. People from another world would stare at that tech and swear it was real magic. Alan drifted through the roaring black market, even on its last day, and watched the chaos hit like a wave. The trade rules were so brutal and unforgiving that even elves struggled to sell a single thing. He spotted companies trying to pass off those fancy purple potions, then getting instantly rejected, one after another, and it hammered the point home. Only the red potion was truly essential. Alan burst into the slave market, where a friendly merchant threw open the welcome mat and greeted him with open arms. Alan didn't hesitate. He declared he was buying the elf's slave on the spot, and the merchant immediately pressed him to confirm he'd read and understood every condition. Alan nodded and confirmed he'd read the purchase terms, then noticed the market was crawling with guards like something big was about to go down. When they demanded his guild card, he didn't even flinch. He just calmly tossed it right into their hands. The moment the merchant laid eyes on the card, his face went pale, and the words on it rattled him to the core. The guild card hit him like a thunderclap, and the merchant bolted in pure panic. Alan felt it in his gut. The card wasn't just special, it carried real, mind-blowing power. Right after Bonk showed up, he flashed a shaky, nervous smile, still respectful, and promised he'd personally run the whole deal. Bank ushered Alan in with a smile that practically radiated welcome. Buzzing with excitement, she leaned in and teamed up with him. Bank admitted one of his newest clients was royal blood, and that lit a fresh fire of caution in him. Then he admitted he'd still never heard of Alan's name or where he came from, and demanded to know when Alan somehow climbed up to a Krem's rank. During the negotiation, Alan whipped out the red potion when they demanded answers, and Bonk's face lit up with shock as he begged to hold it. Even after years as a merchant, this was the first time he'd ever laid eyes on a real red potion, and the sight hit him like lightning, leaving him staring in pure awe. Frank decided to get the potion appraised to prove it was real, and Alan agreed on the spot. No questions, no hesitation. As the appraisal was getting written up, Bonk leaned in and spilled every chilling detail of the elf slavery. Her name was Eula, and she could read, write, and handle arithmetic like it was nothing, but she didn't stop there. She was deadly with magic and deadly with archery too. Eula's gifts didn't stop at basic skills. She knew plants like a legend, which made her perfect for serving, adventuring, or even digging deeper as a researcher. Alan weighed the trouble and the payoff, whether she was worth keeping close, since she was an elf girl, 18, unmarried, and highly skilled, and yet exactly the kind of help he needed to nurture those magic roses. Unc leaned into her rarity and bragged that she was worth the most, while Alan's only mission was locking her down with a Tier 3 work contract. Bank leaned in and said elf slaves were worth way more than the regular kind. They were worth around 5 times more than everyone else, because their skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic were pure gold. A Tier 3 elf contract could run you several 100,000 gold a month, and the top-tier deals even shot into the millions. Even though it burned a hole in his pocket, Alan knew that one red potion was worth it, because the results mattered more, and he promised himself he could always brew more, even if it took time. Alan leaned in as Bank hammered home that it wasn't enough to sell products. You had to forge and keep real connections, too. Right after that, the potion appraisal wrapped up fast. The test results nailed it. This was the real deal. A true grade 3 red potion, the kind of rare, priceless treasure everybody wants. Alan finally exhaled when the appraisal stamped the potion as real. Then Bank clocked the red potion's undeniable aura and nodded, agreeing to move forward. With Alan's nod, he rushed to fetch Eula the elf, flashing the signal that the deal was finally moving to the next step. Eula was dragged into the spotlight. When she stepped up to Alan, she stayed calm and stone quiet, but the moment she saw him, recognition flashed across her eyes. Bonk grinned, knowing everything was ready, and pushed to move on, so they could slam the contract shut. The intermediary leaned in and confirmed the deal was already sealed. Every single expense was paid because Eula demanded it. Because she had 0 debts on her back, Alan didn't have to cough up a single more payment. The red potion had been officially handed over, appraised, and approved. Every deal condition nailed down, and Eula, still reeling, couldn't believe her contract actually involved a real red potion. The contract was locked in as a Tier 3 deal, paying 350,000 gold a month, red potions included in the price. And while the number was huge, Eula brushed it off like she didn't even need the money. She wanted that red potion so bad she'd trade anything for it. She even threw herself into the risk without a single second of doubt. Alan stared at Eula, grilling her on what she was really planning, because he couldn't shake the fear of who she wanted to save. It gets revealed that Eula isn't using the red potion on herself. She plans to pour it on Aria Faintius, a high elf. High elves were one of the rarest races on the planet, so the fact that they even existed made the whole place feel unreal. Alan soon realized that high elves were practically mythical, rare as royalty, dripping with impossible magical power and natural talent. Eula laid out her sworn duty to Lady Aria and kept her devotion burning for more than a year. After a brutal fight with monsters left her badly injured, Aria slipped into a deep, unresponsive blackout, while Eula's loyalty clung to her like a chain, never letting her out of sight. Alan learned that Lady Aria had been dragged for years over her weird lineage, so badly that even her injury started getting whispered as a cold-blooded plot by pure-blood supremacist elves, who wanted to wipe her out to protect their precious bloodline. The elven society splintered in two, one side screaming that a too powerful bloodline could spell disaster, and the other side begging to crown Aria in the royal family, and that storm had a name. Atavism, because high elves can only be born from 2 high elves, so her birth was both brutally rare and unbearably controversial. They warned that those pure-blood supremacist elves could spell disaster later on. As long as Alan stayed locked in the royal capital and stayed clear of the far-off Gadia forest where the elves lived, the threat stayed low. Even with that comfort, he still nodded to the warning and swore to keep it locked in his mind. Alan replayed every shocking thing he'd just been told, and it hit him that the whole mess between the high elves and the regular elves was real and messy, and he couldn't help wondering if she was wired to spill secrets like that before they even finalized the contract. Still, he clung to what mattered most, the hope she'd heal cleanly, with no more complications waiting around the corner. That night, the mansion sat under the moon like it was holding its breath, locked in the new deal they just made. Alan stared at the girl sprawled unconscious, and even after more than a year, she looked almost untouched by time, until he inched closer and felt a tidal wave of magic blasting from her body, the same gut-punch presence he once felt from Sakakibara, leaving him rattled in silence. Alan clocked it instantly. The unconscious girl's magic was running on fumes, dropped to less than half of what it used to be, because she'd been guzzling it nonstop just to stay alive. Even battered like that, her reserves were still massive, several times stronger than Sao Tomas, just not quite in the league of Sakakibara. When they pressed him on whether he was sure about moving forward, Alan snapped his confirmation instantly. No hesitation, no doubts. The group leaned in and fed the unconscious girl that red potion, one precise drop at a time, while everyone watched in panic as she slowly swallowed it down. Time dragged in dead silence, and the air in the room felt so tight you could practically hear the tension begging for something to happen. Everyone holds their breath in tense silence, praying something, anything, kicks in after Arya's potion is finally swallowed. An elf sat by the bedside, gripping the unconscious girl's hand and pressing it to her lips as tears streamed down. She trembled like a leaf in a storm, terrified she'd lose him, so she clung to his hand with everything she had. Moments later, the girl in the bed twitched, then cracked her eyes open, dazed, confused, and clearly fighting through exhaustion. Still clutching his hand, she scanned the room with a gentle, shaky stare, like she was piecing together where she'd ended up and what just happened. Relief flooded the room the second the girl on the bed finally opened her eyes, and everyone gathered around her just stared in awe, thanking fate like they couldn't believe it. She could barely believe she'd snapped back to consciousness. Draped in a cloak, the figure stood there, stone calm, while beside her, tears spilled as someone clutched her hand, sealing the truth. She'd clawed her way back from the brink. The cloaked man chose to slip away, not wanting to ruin the pure happiness hanging in the air. As he burst into the open, the word shot through the group that Arya was finally awake, and the whole room erupted even louder with excitement. As they talk, they drop the truth. She looks calm and locked up, but when it comes to people, she's amazing. Watching how everyone reacts makes it painfully clear. Right after that, a girl strides up to the cloaked man and demands, "Tell me, are you the one who bought Eula?" The woman shot a grateful smile at the cloaked man, her tension melting as relief finally hit. She told him that Eula was basically her daughter, same age as her own kid. The man swore he'd never hurt Eula, but then admitted the cruel truth. She'd be a slave for now, and she wouldn't see her hometown again for a while. The cloaked man finally tore off the truth. He'd been a slave once too, and it hit the woman like a shockwave. She flashed a smile and told him the truth. Her husband used to be her master, and then she crushed the idea that different backgrounds are a deal-breaker. She trusted that even the hardest run-ins could still turn into something amazing. The human woman weighs the elf's strength in her mind and decides, she's got this, and the future is hers. Meanwhile, the young guy outside hurries to prep the house like their arrival is about to blow his world up. The girl blurts out that she heard the young man finally bought himself a house. He shrugs and admits it's no big deal, just a plain, one-story spot. He fires off a quick question, did he buy it the right way or not? And yeah, he wonders if the furniture came from some other world. Then he admits it outright. He's obsessed with things that don't belong here. The girl fires a question at him, right on the spot. The young man asked if she could come visit his house. His eyes widen as her request lands like a punch to the chest.